The story begins with a guy who is struggling to climb the stairs, carrying a delivery package in his hands. It was already the 28th floor. The guy was sweating and angry because the elevator wasn't working. Arriving at the right apartment, he rang the doorbell, which was carefully opened by a middle-aged woman. She was not satisfied, as she waited a long time for the order. The guy began to make excuses, explaining to her that the elevator was not working and that he was trying to do everything as quickly as possible. But the woman was only worried that her order had cooled, and she did not want to pay for delivery. She started screaming and yelling, saying that delivery has been working like crazy lately because the restaurant where she ordered food is across the street. The guy also started to get out of himself. He shouted back at the woman, "Why can't she get up and go get food herself?" But then he came to his senses and immediately started apologizing. Apologizing, he thought that if she now complains about him, then he will be deprived of the right to accept orders for a few days. After leaving the entrance, he went to his moped, put on his helmet, and sat behind the wheel. He was upset and blamed himself for the fact that he is a pauper and has no choice but to endure this horror. A thick mist began to form here next to him. She looked terrible, but the guy just sighed heavily. These were the next gates that have recently begun to open around the world. These gates lead to dungeons teeming with terrifying monsters that you have to fight every time. It became a big threat that could not be resisted by human efforts. And then the gods, whom we call mythical, chose several representatives of the human race. The gods endowed them with incredible abilities and strength. Thus, these chosen ones took upon themselves the responsibility to fight the monsters. People all over the world call these chosen ones hunters. They are loved and respected everywhere. The guy looking at the gate thought only that now he would have to go around for a very long time, because for such simple people as him, this otherworldly heresy was nothing more than an eternal headache. Here the guy got a call. He picked up the phone and heard the shout of his boss, who began to scold him for being rude to a customer. The guy's name was Ha Jung, and since the establishment lost a customer because of him, he was banned from ordering for a week. Ha Jung couldn't even object. The boss sent him a negative customer review. The guy asked to explain the situation, but the boss was not inclined. Out of indignation, Ha Jung grabbed his head and shouted in a fit of emotion, scaring the people around him. He thought that in a week he would have to pay the rent. And since there is no money, I will have to work as a loader. Looking at the gate, Ha Jung thought about how he would like to be chosen by the mythical ones and become a hunter, because then he would be rolling like cheese in butter. When the guy was about to go home, he suddenly received a notification. The phone lit up in a bright blue color and another delivery order was displayed. This surprised Ha Jung. He had never used such an application. The notification looked unusual. Ha Jung decided to accept the order, and immediately there were bright flashes of light, from which the guy closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes, he was surprised and did not even understand where he was at first. The place looked magical. Pink clouds floated everywhere, and in front of the boy rose a tall gate of incredible beauty. Ha Jung did not understand where he was. He thought it was a dream, or maybe he was lucky and the gods chose him. In this case, he will finally be able to get out of the slums and no longer work as a courier. This thought made the guy happy. But then he receives a delivery notification, and the application lays out the necessary route to deliver the nectar. The request surprised the guy, but he still decides to accept the order and see what will happen. As soon as he pressed the button, the gate opened, letting him in. He entered the city of incredible beauty and continued his journey according to the laid-out route. According to the map, he reached the destination. In front of him rose a huge, beautiful building. It was like a real abode of the gods. Going inside, Ha Jung was struck by the beauty of the place. He had never seen anything more luxurious. The guy went to the door and knocked. In his head, he already thought that now he might have a chance to become a hunter because he would meet the gods. A very beautiful girl opened the door. Ha Jung immediately understood that she was a goddess. He was a little confused but decided to say hello and introduce himself. But she interrupted him with a surprised voice, asking what an ordinary person can do on Olympus. And I asked now to explain how he got here. The guy replied that he doesn't know how he ended up here, but he is here thanks to a strange application and an order in it. The goddess softened, realizing what was the matter. It's all the fault of idiot Hermes. Having finished her short monologue, the goddess asks the guy to wait a little and clarifies that usually people can't even touch such things. She brings him a bottle with a strange yellow liquid and asks him to pick it up and deliver it to his brother as soon as possible, since he might cause a scandal if he does not receive the order on time. The girl also strictly ordered the guy not to open or drink the contents of the bottle. Not a single drop. Ha-jung agreed. The girl looked at him for the last time and gestured that she was following him. Then the door slammed shut. Ha-jung stood in bewilderment and did not understand what was happening here. Will he have to be a boy on the run again? He got angry because he thought he would never be a courier again, but even now he receives threats and warnings from the gods not to touch their food. At first, he thought of just throwing away the bottle of nectar that looked like apple juice. But then I thought that it should be delivered to the goddess's brother, and this means that, most likely, he is also God. And if so, then for a favor he may become his heavenly patron. Having thought about such convenience, Ha-jung decides to make the last order in his life and sets off. The navigator brought him to a strange and even a little scary place. All around were wastelands and a road cracked by the heat. A voice from the application warned that the courier was approaching his destination. Arriving at his destination, Ha-jung saw a huge house on a hill with lava flowing down it. Having climbed another ladder earlier today, the guy walked forward and loudly shouted that the delivery had arrived. Entering the house, he saw stone walls and sparks flying in all directions. Ha-jung noticed that it was hot here, like in a sauna, and decided to find the source of this heat. In front of him stood a strong silhouette of a man, his back turned, and he was forging iron with a huge hammer. Hearing the sounds, a harsh man's voice was heard. He asked who came to him. The guy got scared and immediately began to justify himself, saying that he was not some kind of thief, but just a courier who brought a delivery for him. The man started to approach Ha-jung, but he staggered back in fright. But as soon as he approached the guy and understood the situation, a good gleam played in his eyes. He understood that the courier was sent by his sister. Ha-jung was surprised that these two are related, but they are not at all alike. While the guy was thinking, relatives and they are brother and sister, the man suddenly realized that the delivery was not brought by Hermes, who had promised to do it. He suddenly woke up and began to ask how an ordinary mortal got here. But Ha-jung, asking to calm him down, said that his sister had sent him to deliver the nectar. Seeing the nectar, the man's face changed sharply again and he looked more friendly. The man was surprised that Ha-jung delivered the order to him and did not take a single sip. The guy proudly told me with dignity that he is honest and does not drink other people's orders. In response to this, the man laughed sharply, and so much so that Ha-jung was surprised that there was such a thing in it. And then the man said that one sip of this nectar could make the guy a real god, but he did not take advantage of this opportunity. Ha-jung stared at the bottle in his hands. He was shocked by the situation and himself. But before he could digest the information, the man snatched the bottle from his hands. Opening the bottle with his teeth, the man gladly began to drink all the contents to the last drop. The guy just looked at it in disappointment and quietly asked for at least one sip of this liquid. But the man did not hear him. And when he had finished drinking, he gladly broke the bottle in half, shouting that he loves to drink nectar in one sitting. He continued to talk about the fact that he had not drunk such delicious nectar for a long time, and praised the guy for quickly delivering it. But Ha-jung only looked at the broken bottle. The guy liked God, and he decided to introduce himself to him, calling himself Hephaestus. Ha-jung Lee also introduced himself. Hephaestus distorted the boy's name, called him Ha-jung Lily, and while Ha-jung asked to tell God that he was wrong, Hephaestus interrupted him and went to work further. He wished the guy a good journey, but he stopped him in confusion. Touching the shoulder of Hephaestus, Ha-jung, making a cute expression on his face, told God that he had not paid him for the delivery. The guy persistently warned that he would not leave him empty-handed. Hephaestus said that he should have already received the payment for the delivery. Smiling, he returned to work. The guy did not understand what this could mean and decided to look in the application. His screen lit up so much that Ha-jung had to cover his face with his hand. The application brought him back to the world of people. Already in his bed, the guy saw 1,000 points on his balance sheet. He recalled how the bright light from the application brought him home, and how at first he thought it was all a dream. However, his trip was reminded of a notification that did not go anywhere. The guy did not understand what to do with these points. It would be better if he were paid in ordinary money. He was disappointed that he had been to the world of gods. The points were all he could get. But he could have become an S-rank hunter, because it didn't cost the gods anything to make him strong. Here, he receives a new notification that the accumulated points can be exchanged for goods in the store. The guy clicks on the link and the products that can be bought are displayed on the screen. But they are unusual, and apparently not intended for ordinary people. Bow, arrows, moped, and all for an exorbitant price. Apparently, these are things for hunters, but there is no equipment for them. Even so, he will not survive in the dungeon. Ha-jung comes to the conclusion that all this is useless and he will not become a hunter anyway. And then a window pops up in the application, where it is written that points can be exchanged for current currency in the world of people. And 1 point is equal to 10,000 won. The guy carefully presses the button and waits for any reaction. At some point, a currency with 10,000 won written on it flew directly from the ceiling to him and fell on the bed. The money was real. The guy looked at the balance and saw a value of 999 points. So this exchange really works. Realizing this, he began to quickly click on the screen. Points decreased, and currencies falling from top to bottom became more and more. This made Ha-jung extremely happy. He was incredibly happy. Finally, he has money. He could not believe that this was not a dream. Ha-jung sat in the cafe and ate a large portion of delicious food. He was so happy to eat in the cafe because he could not afford it before. The dish was really very tasty. It turned out that converting points into real money really works. The guy has 800 points left on his account, which is 10 million won, and all this in one delivery. With joy, Ha-jung cried right during the meal, which surprised the waitress, who even asked if everything was okay with the dish. The guy replied that everything was fine, but from the realization of his happiness, he continued to cry and laugh at the same time. The waitress looked at him in disbelief, while Ha-jung continued to eat food on both cheeks and think about what he would do with the remaining money. The television was talking about the country's best hunter guild, Yongwon. She signed a contract with Hyun Songlim, who became her new member. Now the guild is preparing for another raid on Tartarus, one of the most terrible and dangerous dungeons. Hyun Songlim's heavenly patron is rumored to be the Olympian god Hephaestus. This news stunned Ha-jung a little. After all, he was already familiar with it. But then he relaxed and realized that he didn't care about it. After all, for a guy, Hephaestus, first of all, is the best client in the world. After leaving the cafe, Ha-jung patted his stomach, feeling a pleasant feeling of fullness. Then he heard the sound of a notification from his phone, which was in his pocket. This must be a new order! Ha-jung took his phone out of his pocket in anticipation. His instinct did not fail him. This was indeed a new order from the world of the gods. It's good that Ha-jung was on a moped. The screen glowed with a bright blue light again. The guy accepted the order. He closed his eyes from the glow, and when he did, he was in a completely different place. It looked like a beautiful garden in which many flowers and trees grew, and butterflies flew around and birds sang. Ha-jung opened the app to see what he would be delivering this time. But then someone called him by the wrong name, Ha-jung Lily, which Hephaestus gave him. Turning around, he saw an incredibly beautiful girl who introduced herself as Demeter. The guy immediately greeted and bowed as a sign of respect. Demeter said that her nephew spoke well of him as a delivery man. It was Hephaestus. Ha-jung was once again surprised by the kinship of the gods. The members of this family looked very different. Demeter, smiling, said that since the guy had delivered the nectar so quickly and could be trusted, then let him deliver something for her as well. Ha-jung was encouraged and said that Demeter was not mistaken, and he could indeed deliver anything she wanted. And I thought to myself that it would be a very easy earning. Maybe the goddess will give him some kind of magic wreath. But Demeter told the guy to wait a little. She folded her hands, from which a pleasant green-yellow light began to pour. After that, a small box tied with a red ribbon appeared in her hands. The goddess asked Ha-jung to take this thing to her daughter. She regretted that she could not do it herself, because the gods should not leave their abodes without a special reason. Delivering the box didn't seem like a difficult task to Ha-jung. He confidently stated that he understood everything and would cope in no time. Then the face of the goddess changed. It became sad. Everything around began to wither right before our eyes. As Ha-jung looked around and tried to figure out what was happening, Demeter thanked him, turned around, and walked away. The guy could not understand why everything had become so gloomy. What if he had more than a simple lunchbox in his hands? Suddenly there is a bomb inside. But the terrible thoughts quickly disappeared, because for Ha-jung, the main thing is that he will be paid for this. Moreover, this is a parcel for her daughter, so it is unlikely that there will be anything dangerous there. Taking the phone in his hands, the guy opened the application to see where he needed to go. The phone lit up again. Thus, Ha-jung was transported to another place again. It turned out to be an ordinary human world again. It seemed strange to the guy. He took it on his phone and looked at the route. Ha-jun also wondered what Demeter's daughter was doing on Earth in Korea. Perhaps that is why the goddess could not pass the parcel herself. Determined to find out on the spot, Ha-jong, inspired by the new order, hit the road more than ever. Driving through the city, the guy thought about how much he would be paid this time. After a long journey, he stopped, as the route was interrupted. Seeing the sight before him, he had time to regret that he had decided to take this order. In front of him yawned a huge gate that led to the most dangerous dungeon in the world. It is strange that this is where the daughter of the goddess lives. Ha-jong looked at this gate with a frightened look, because no one knows what lies in the depths of this dungeon. Then he thought that suddenly this girl was not in the dungeon itself, but was just waiting for him at the entrance. This thought calmed him, but not for long, as the route on the map was updated and went far into the depths of the dungeon. This frightened Ha-jun, and he was already thinking of canceling the order. But a divine card flashed on my phone, and then a notification popped up that there were 42 minutes left to complete the order. And if the order was not completed, then as a punishment, the offender would be turned into a pig with the preservation of the past mind. The terrible punishment upset Ha-jun. He had already regretted many times that he had accepted this order without even reading the conditions. However, it was difficult to foresee this. Now the order must be made, but there were too many guards at the gate. It will be impossible to pass through them, especially without a hunter's license. At such a crucial moment, Ha-jun came to mind tonkatsu, fried bacon, and pork soup. He did not like the prospect of turning into an animal at all. Then, he again receives a notification on his phone, which said that he needs to look into the store, because there may be things that can help complete the task. This did not give Ha-jong much hope, because everything there was very expensive, and he would not have enough money to buy anything in it. The guy was already thinking of cashing out his glasses and hiring a couple of hunters to complete the task for him. But then, in the assortment, he saw a product on sale, an invisible hat. This artifact completely hid the presence of the host. The guy spent all his money on this hat. It doesn't look like a promotion, but this time it must be done. Therefore, Ha-jung still bought a hat. It appeared in the air immediately after pressing the button and began to fall to the side. The hat, more like a helmet, rolled along the road. Ha-jun immediately rushed to catch his 8 million won. Everything turned out fine. He caught the helmet and pressed it to him with relief. The guy put on a helmet. He had 28 minutes left. It was necessary to hurry. Ha-jong got on his moped and calmly rode into the dungeon past the guards. The hat went off and no one noticed him. One of the guards sneezed, but thought it was because of the wind. The second guard told the first one to be on the alert, because hunters would soon arrive at the roadstead. The place where Ha-jong found himself looked as creepy as possible. The guy did not understand how you could want to eat lunch in this place, but there was no time to think about it. Time was running out, so Ha-jong stepped on the gas and rushed forward. A voice was heard from above, which characterized the guy as Ha-jong Lee, level 20S, male gender, delivery man. He continued to drive forward, passing monsters and creepy places. The voice had been talking about him all this time, noting that there was no information about him regarding the hunter's license and the contract with the heavenly patron. It was also noted that the guy does not have special physical data, superpowers, or other special skills. Ha-jong continued to ride forward. A notification on the phone said that he was approaching the target. Against all odds, he will be the first to reach the depths of Tartarus. The guy drove into a huge stone building. Looking around, he couldn't understand why there was no one around. He reached his goal and managed to do it in less than 30 minutes, and now he will definitely not be turned into a pig. Then Ha-jong shouted that the delivery had arrived and asked if anyone was there. Then a light shone sharply out of the darkness, which hit her eyes painfully. At first, Ha-jong couldn't understand what was in front of him. But when he saw it, he realized that he was in great danger. In front of him was a huge dog with 3 heads. All 3 heads were chained and grinning at the guy. Looking at this eerie sight, Ha-jong thought that he would rather choose to become a pig than end up here with this monster. The huge Cerberus looked at Ha-jong and grinned, which left the guy in a stupor. He thought this was his end, but he still has 199 coins left. But so far, he has only been able to enjoy a large plate of seafood noodles. But then, Ha-jun remembers that the invisible helmet can be used 2 times for 30 minutes, and he grasped at the thought like a drowning man grasping at straws. The guy activated the helmet, but it was too late, and the huge beast was already flying towards him, grinning angrily. But then a girl's voice rang out, which ordered the Cerberus to retreat since it was forbidden to eat any nonsense. The monster stopped and began to drill the guy only with his eyes, while he was very surprised by what was happening. The guy turned around and saw a little girl behind him, who fearlessly stared at the Cerberus, who even began to look friendlier in her presence. The girl was very beautiful and young in appearance. Ha Jong wondered what she was doing in such a wilderness. The girl approached the Cerberus and, stroking it, told the guy not to worry because her dog does not bite. Ha Jong noticed her resemblance to her mother, but noted to himself that Cerberus might not bite, but he didn't need it to swallow it whole. While the girl was fiddling with the Cerberus and it was smiling from her caresses, Ha Jong, apologizing, decided to draw her attention to himself. Just as the guy wanted to talk about delivery, a rough male voice echoed from behind. Apparently the man was looking for Persephone, who was the girl. A man stepped out of the shadows, and when he saw Persephone playing with Cerberus and Ha Jun frightened, he became aggressive. He wondered why the girl was having fun with this mortal who dared to enter the underworld ruled by Hades. Ha Jong began to mumble, trying to introduce himself and talk about the purpose of his visit. But Hades, the god of the realm of the dead, interrupted him. Hades was outraged that 100 Ha Jong was the first person in the last few thousand years who had dared to go to the underworld, since the time of Orpheus. Dark, smoky clots reached out to the guy and surrounded him from all sides, grabbing him by the neck and starting to strangle him. As Ha Jun tried to break free and take a breath of air, Hades reasoned that Orpheus had come to this place to save his deceased wife, and this guy must have come to steal his helmet. Picking it up from the floor, Hades realized that this helmet did not belong to him, and this confused him. Then Persephone offered to listen to the guy, since it is unlikely that he made this long journey just like that. Hades then relaxed his grip and let go of Ha Jun, giving him a chance to finally say why he had come here. While the guy was trying to clear his throat to say something, Hades asked him to state his intentions, because of which he dared to invade his domain. Standing up, Ha Jong asked in hoarse voices to be spared, because he had just brought the delivery. Then Hades was surprised and asked what he had brought for him, the Lord of the Underworld. Then Ha Jun said that the delivery was not for him, since Hades' wife had passed it on to his daughter. The guy meant Persephone. Then Hades asked the girl if this was true, because the delivery was usually done by Hermes, and not by an ordinary mortal. Ha Jong replied that he did not know all the details and simply brought the delivery as he was asked, and took out a small box. When Persephone saw it, she was very happy and said that it was indeed a lunchbox from her mother. Then Hades asked the guy if the delivery from his wife was true. To which Ha Jun replied that it was so. She asked to give the thing to his daughter. Then Persephone intervened again, and after examining the box, said that it was a lunchbox from her mother-in-law. While the girl was rejoicing, Ha Jun realized that all this time he had been thinking differently and decided to clarify where Hades' wife was now. Then Hades, embracing the girl, said that Persephone was his love. Then the guy suddenly shouted that it was terrible and he was already too old for Persephone. But then it dawns on him that he has just insulted the god of the underworld, and he shuts his mouth with his hand. But it was too late. Hades towered over him menacingly and looked very angry, since a mere mortal dared to say such a thing to him. Already saying goodbye to life, Ha Jun began to try to justify himself. He mumbled that this was not what he meant and did not want to offend Lord Hades, that is, the god of the underworld. But then Hades' face changed abruptly and burst into loud laughter. This reaction surprised even Persephone. But most of all, Ha Jong was dumbfounded. He did not know at all what to think and what to say. Hades said that he had not laughed so much for a long time. He never thought that a mere mortal would think of insulting him. And then he asked the guy what his name was. Ha Zhongli introduced himself, after which Hades forgave him for his impudence as the guy was able to amuse him, but warned him not to dare to tease him anymore. Otherwise, let him be prepared for the consequences. For a better understanding of the situation, Hades released his dark, smoky tentacles again, which made the guy tense. But Ha Jun said that he would not do it again, and Hades stopped using his power. Then he said that the payment was already on the account, and asked to thank his mother-in-law for the delicious food. Opening the application, Ha Jun saw on the balance payment for the delivery itself, in the amount of 10,000 coins and 5,000 coins as a tip from Hades. Raising the helmet, Hades also returned it to the guy, but he could barely hide the positive emotions from what he saw on the screen. In a burst of joy, he thanked Hades, took the helmet, and bowed to him as a sign of respect. It was time to go back. At this time, the hunters were making their raid through the dungeon. They had been bravely fighting monsters for a long time. One of them, Do-yun, had just dealt the strongest blow to the dragon-like monster, but he was not going to give up and continued his attack. Before Yun did not have time to repel it, but from above, another hunter was already approaching the monster to deliver a decisive crushing blow. With his huge sword, he sliced through the monster, and it fell dead to the ground. It was the leader of the Gidia, Yongwan, who was ranked third in the ranking of mythical hunters. His name was Park Sung-jung. He praised his friend, saying that he had done a good job and held out his hand to help him up. He happily noted that they were finally able to clear the third floor. The hunters around began to rejoice. The leader praised them, saying that it was thanks to all of them that the Yongwan Guild was the permanent leader. Then Song-jung exhaled tiredly, and Do-yun noted that he already thought that they would not survive today. The leader looked at his friend and said that he had done the best job today. The guild should be grateful to him for that. This greatly touched the guy. Tears of happiness even appeared in his eyes. He said that he would never betray his master. Behind them all this time, a girl was sitting and finishing off the monster with her dagger. Her name was Irene. Seo-jong told her that she could already relax. Baek Irene was the guild's deputy leader and ranked 17th in the Battle Hunter rankings. She wanted to collect as many magic stones as possible. But then she turned around abruptly and shouted that something was approaching them at great speed. Song-jong tensed up as their affairs were bad, as they no longer had the energy to defend themselves. The leader ordered everyone to prepare for an attack. The guy said that if it became too dangerous, then the rest of the hunters had better run away. He and Irene will apprehend the monsters. But the guild members did not want to back down and were determined to fight alongside their favorite leader side by side. Song-jong was pleased with their mood. He was sincerely happy that the team was ready to follow him, no matter what. Then a noise was heard from the darkness. The entire guild was already ready to repel the blows, and then a dark silhouette emerges from the shadows. A guy on a moped with a strange helmet on his head. He was driving at high speed and was surprised that there were many people on his way. He loudly asked them to stand aside, otherwise he might crash into someone. Driving past the monster's carcass, Hajong noted that they had struck him down at the right time, as the helmet was already coming to an end. As he was leaving, he turned to the hunters and said that there were many monsters with black magic here, so they needed to be ready to repel the attack. After wishing them good luck, the guy disappeared into the darkness. The hunters stood with puzzled faces and tried to digest what had just happened for a long time. It was very strange and unexpected. Ha Jong sat and pondered his income. As much as 150 million, if measured in years, you get about the era of dinosaurs. It is also as much as 3 times more than the population of Korea. And if we assume that you can get 3,001 for each delivery, then you need to make 50,000 deliveries. And then that's how much money the guy will get if you exchange all the coins. Very good. But the current balance was 15,000 coins. Remembering his dangerous adventures yesterday, Hajong realized that he had been through a lot and was very tired. But how can anything bother him when such numbers count? However, the guy wants even more money. His desire for more at some point consumed him with his head, and he began to act like a madman. But it didn't last long, as Ha Jun's stomach made a rumbling sound, alerting the guy that it was time to have a snack. Thinking about what to eat, Ha Jun decides to order himself a fried chicken with beer. At this time, at a conference with Yongwan's guild leader, Hunter Park Sung-jun, the host thanked everyone for attending this event, which had already come to an end. Do-yoon and Irene, who were standing next to Song-jun, rejoiced at the end of the conference and the good work of their leader. He, in turn, could not rest properly for a long time. He looked very tired. Song-jun noted that after the raid, he had no time to rest at all. And today, he also has a meeting with the leader of the Hunters Association. Then Do-yun, understanding the whole difficult situation, nevertheless, out of curiosity, decided to ask if Song-jun had mentioned the incident with the guy on the scooter at the conference. The leader replied that he had not yet spoken about him, as they had not yet figured out what it was and how he got there. Song-jong blamed himself for not even thinking of catching up with him due to the fatigue of the battles. But his friends supported him, saying that they were now collecting records from that area. Do-yun speculated that the guy might be a monster since he had appeared very suddenly, and apart from their guild, no one had cleared the first floor yet. But Irene doubted her friend's assumption. She added that the guy was wearing a strange helmet and he was riding a scooter. Do-yun assumed that it was a hunter with magical equipment, as the guy had mentioned the next floor as he drove by. Song-jung stopped their thoughts and told them not to worry so much about it. Their primary task is to clear the dungeon and not to find out who this person is on the scooter. The leader also said that he was going to go to Suwon. He wanted to instruct the recruits to test all their weapons, but it turned out that they needed more ore, and it could only be found in the dungeon here. This news shocked Do-yun. He said that today he wanted to train with his comrades, but Song-jun told me to leave it to Irene. Do-yun should go with him because he is the only one who has a driver's license. Do-yun tiredly agreed and asked what exactly he needed to get. Song-jung tried to remember the name of the material. Remembering, he replied that he needed heavenly steel. At this time, Hajong had already received fried chicken with cold beer. He was already anticipating the taste of his food. But suddenly he heard the notification sound again and exploded from his seat. As he thought, it was a new order. Deciding that the hen would wait, the guy decided to take the order and not make his customers wait. After pressing the button to accept the order, the phone lit up with a bright blue light again and transported Hajun to the world of the gods. The guy was transported directly to the monastery of Hephaestus. He was surprised that he was here right away. This is not the first time Hephaestus has made an order, which makes him the best customer in the eyes of the guy. But then it dawned on Hajun that because he was in too much of a hurry, he had forgotten his uniform and scooter. While the guy was thinking about what to do, someone suddenly quietly called from behind him. Hajong shuddered at the surprise and turned around. In front of him stood Hephaestus, whose eyes were wet. He looked at Hajong as if someone had offended him. Then the guy decided to clarify why God was not at home, to which Hephaestus pitifully replied that he had been kicked out. This startled Hajun and decided to wonder what could have happened that God had been kicked out of his own home. Hephaestus explained that he and his younger brother Dionysus gathered from time to time for a small feast and had fun together. But his wife is always against such feasts, especially if there is booze. This time was no exception. She got angry and threw Hephaestus and Dionysus out of the house, telling them to drink elsewhere. And in pursuit, she also shouted at them not to return. Dionysus immediately fled, and Hephaestus was left alone. Now he is very sad. After listening to God, Hajong thought to himself, how could this pathetic man be a mythical creature if he was much more human? But aloud, the guy only said that he was sorry that this happened, and asked what Hephaestus wanted to order. Hephaestus looked desperate and asked to bring just something to eat and drink. Hajong was surprised by this lack of specifics. But Hephaestus explained that his wife had kicked him out before he had a chance to taste the dishes, so he was starving to death. Although he is a god and is unlikely to die, he still wants to eat. He even begged Heba, but she refused and replied that she had run out of all nectar reserves. Almost crying, Hephaestus said that Hajong was the only one he had left. The guy clarified what could be brought to him. He had no idea what the gods ate at all. Hephaestus said that anything would do, but if there was a choice, he would want some meat and more booze. Hephaestus had already fallen to the ground in despair, and closed his eyes while Hajong asked for some time and was transported back to his world. He hadn't expected this turn of events, but if he had to find food, he knew how to do it. Returning to Hephaestus, Hajong was holding a package of beer and chicken in his hands. Although he ordered it for himself, he was happy to share it with Hephaestus. God wondered what it was. Hajong briefly described his food and said that they call it chimak. Hephaestus and Hajun came to a very beautiful place. Sitting on the edge of a small cliff from where they could see a wonderful sunset, they began to taste the food. After tasting the drink, Hephaestus noted that he had never tasted such a delicious beer in his life. Hajong was glad that God liked it, but he was already holding a chicken in his hands and looked at it dubiously, noting that he was a little disappointed with the size of the food. But after taking a small bite, he shouted with delight that this was the best meat he had ever tasted. Hajong was surprised by God's behavior again. At such moments, he did not look like a mythical character. Hephaestus thanked the guy and said that he would generously thank him for his work. Looking at his balance, Ha-jong saw that 15,000 coins had been added to his account. It turns out that God paid him 150 million won for this delivery of the chicken. In the next moment, Hephaestus said that Ha-jun could always ask him for help if he needed it. In joy, God was even ready to hug the guy. He was also happy thanks to the points he received. But then a woman's voice was heard from behind, calling for Hephaestus. Turning around, Ha-jong couldn't believe his eyes. In front of him stood a girl of incredible beauty. She was more beautiful than anyone he had seen in all this time. The guy was surprised that such a beautiful girl was married to a man like Hephaestus. Ha-jong didn't even notice how he knelt in front of her beauty. However, the goddess began to be indignant that Hephaestus was drinking again, and even in such a place. God answered her that she herself drove him away and told her to drink outside the house. The goddess began to get angry. Looking up angrily, she called herself a fool and admitted that Hephaestus was right. But the sarcasm and anger in her voice contradicted her words. As Hephaestus digested what he had heard, Ha-jong said that he should apologize because her was really wrong in this situation. Turning to Ha-jun, Hephaestus decided to follow his advice. The goddess recognized the guy by name and interrupted Hephaestus. She introduced herself as Aphrodite. She apologized for her husband's behavior and hoped he hadn't caused much inconvenience. Ha-jung replied that everything was fine, and he was only glad that her husband was using his delivery. Then Hephaestus, who had been sitting quietly before, asked to order something else. The guy was surprised that he wanted it right now. But Aphrodite interrupted him again. She enthusiastically told Ha-jong that Hephaestus had talked a lot about him and said that the guy was doing a great job. Ha-jong was inspired, confirmed her words, and called himself a true deliverer of the gods. After all, he could always be relied on. Hephaestus interrupted him, saying that he was counting on him right now, even though Ha-jong was not talking to him. Hephaestus threw the guy a route passing somewhere in the city of Suwon and said that he would need heavenly steel. Driving along the continued route behind the moon steel, Ha-jong hoped that the 100 was going correctly. This time, his target was the Sori mines. My heart was pounding wildly as the path looked terrible. The guy could not believe that he would have to go down to the dungeon again, and voluntarily. But he was ready. Before that, when Ha-jong learned that he needed to get moon ore, he was indignant, since the place where it is located is even more dangerous than Tartarus. But the amount attracted him. The guy apologized to Hephaestus and said that he would not be able to take the order, as he almost died fulfilling the order of Lady Demeter. Aphrodite froze in horror at such news. When Hephaestus asked what had happened, Ha-jung replied that he was not a hunter and could not fight monsters, even if they were very weak, and he managed to go down to the dungeon only with the help of a product from the store called Replica of the Invisibility Hat. Thus, the monsters did not notice him. But the helmet has expired, and now it does not work. Then Hephaestus asked the guy for a helmet and said that he could fix it so that it could start working again. He will definitely cope with it. After all, he is the godsmith. As soon as he works on any metal or product, it becomes mythical. Therefore, Ha-jong can carry everything he has. Hephaestus was willing to fix everything, and so it happened. The helmet regained its functions and was ready for use. Putting on the helmet in the dungeon, the guy went on. The entrance to the dungeon looked dangerous and creepy, but the courier was determined and drove only forward. He wanted to make money. Entering the dungeon, the guy, to his surprise, saw a huge pile of people who were quietly walking, chatting, and buying street food. Apparently, this dungeon was a very popular place to visit, even too much. So, in addition to the obstacle in the form of monsters, I had to face an obstacle in the form of a crowd of people, which I had to drive through. You will have to go much deeper to find what Hephaestus needs. At the entrance to the dungeon, Do-yun stood and chewed snacks contentedly. Ha-jong calmly and discreetly, thanks to his mythical helmet, rode through the hunter who did not even notice him. The guy had been riding a moped deep into the dungeon for 30 minutes. The road was long, but finally there was not a soul around and we could drive safely. But then the road began to crook. There were a lot of bumps under the wheels and the moped began to shake, but at least some minerals were already visible on the walls of the dungeon. But Ha-jong needed moon steel that emitted red light. A skeleton pops up right on the wheel from the side, making strange, quiet sounds. It was so unexpected that it greatly frightened Ha-jun, who abruptly turned the steering wheel to the side. Because of this, the wheel of his moped hit a stone and was damaged. The stone shattered, the guy stopped, and all because of this stupid skeleton who can't even see him. Trying to start the moped, Ha-jung noticed that it had been damaged by hitting a rock. But this is not scary because he now has money to buy a new moped. This thought pleased him. Ha-jung continued on his way and finally noticed a red glow at the end of the cave. He finally reached his goal. In front of him was a huge piece of red moon steel. The guy walked up to him and, taking off his helmet, stared at the beautiful stone. But there was one catch. The mineral was deep in the ground. And how can he get it now and take it to its destination? It seemed like an impossible task. Ha-jung tried to get the stone, but it was too deep for him to be pulled out without special equipment. Sitting on the top of the stone, the guy wondered what he needed to do now to get it. Then he received a notification again, which said that he could look into the store, because there might be goods that could help. But Ha-jung was skeptical about this, because the goods in it are very expensive. Then he noticed, as it turned out, the tool he needed. A miner's church, which helps to extract any ore from the bowels one time. Its value was 47 million won. Ha-jung was outraged by the cost of the church. It is not clear why such a thing is so expensive, and even you can use it only once. It doesn't look like it was made of gold. Then the guy remembered the tool shop at the entrance. There you can buy something for a lower price. Ha-jung did not want to go broke on some church. He will definitely spend less on gasoline. But turning to the moped, the guy remembered that it was damaged and it would be very long and difficult to ride it. Then the guy thought about the rationality of his actions and decided that it would be more logical not to go back. Ha-jung decides to buy the church for a high price in order to use it and get moonsteel. Bringing the tool over his head, the guy thought that he would ask to include the cost of the church in the cost of the order. Ha-jung struck directly at the redstone with all his strength. A loud sound rang out. The moonsteel was obtained, and the church disappeared in an instant, dissolving into thin air. While the guy watched in surprise at the disappearance of the tool, a large piece of moonsteel, freed from the bowels of the earth, rolled down. Ha-jung rushed after him. Catching the stone, the guy noted that it was insanely heavy, and it was very difficult to hold it in his hands. He barely loaded it into his special delivery box, which was attached to the moped. Ha-jung was very tired and thought that it would be nice to just teleport back. But suddenly a strange sound was heard behind him. Turning around, he noticed a huge stone monster that seemed to have just woken up and was approaching the guy. Ha-jung screamed in fear and at first couldn't even move, falling into a stupor. But suddenly the monster did not let out a terrible roar and rushed towards the guy. At this time, Do-yun destroyed the very skeleton that Ha-jung had come across with his strong blow. Suddenly, the hunter stopped and listened, hearing a strange sound in the depths of the dungeon. It was so strong that the walls shook as if an earthquake had begun. Hearing that something was coming, Do-yun took a fighting stance and prepared to repel the attack. But then a frightened guy on a moped rides out of the darkness at high speed, shouting to him to step aside. Do-yun recognized the courier on the moped. They had already met in Tartarus. The hunter was very surprised by what he saw. But Ha-jung shouted at him to save himself if he wanted to live. Without having time to say anything else, Ha-jung disappeared into the darkness of the dungeon. Do-yun was left alone and heard the sounds behind him. Turning around, he saw a huge stone monster in front of him, which had been chasing the courier all this time. The hunter, instantly realizing that this monster was beyond his strength, was frightened and rushed back, shouting to Ha-jung to take him with him, but he had already rushed away. Returning to Hephaestus with the order, Ha-jung shouted to God in a fit of anger that he could die again. Hephaestus turned to the boy's voice and noted that he had returned quickly and his speed had not let him down. But Ha-jung continued to be indignant, as Hephaestus had not warned him how dangerous this task was. Hephaestus was surprised, because he thought that the guy was greatly exaggerating when he said that he almost died. In God's opinion, there was nothing life-threatening about this task. Hephaestus suggested that this was due to the fact that the guy was driving at high speed to make it. But Ha-jung interrupted him, saying that it wasn't about speed at all, but that the load was simply huge. Taking out a huge stone, the guy simply dropped it on the floor due to the weight of the load. Raising his head, Ha-jung addressed Hephaestus again in an indignant voice, saying that it was very difficult to carry such a boulder. Hephaestus stared dumbfounded at the large stone and wondered what Ha-jung had brought him. The guy swooped down on God in bewilderment and replied that it was the same heavenly steel that he had asked for. And even if he doesn't think to say that he delivered something wrong, but Hephaestus said that Ha-jung misunderstood him. The god picked up a huge piece of moonsteel, while the courier was already seething with anger and indignation. Then Hephaestus said that he had simply never seen such a huge piece of ore in his life, and moreover, the purest one. The god asked Hajong where he could find such a treasure. The guy calmed down and looked at Hephaestus in surprise. He, in turn, brought and showed him another piece of moon steel, but it was much smaller than what the guy had brought. God said it was the largest piece of this ore that he had ever had. Hephaestus said that Hajong Li was even more capable than he looked, and thanked the guy for his hard work. God thought that the courier deserved a much bigger reward, and immediately after these words, asked the guy to check his balance in the app. While Hephaestus was admiring the stone that had been delivered, Hajong was dumbfounded when he saw the numbers on the account. For delivery, he received 20,000 points. The tip from Hephaestus was 30,000 points. Thus, he already had 500 million won in his account. Hephaestus said that this was his reward for the unprecedented amount of ore. It was unwise to have the courier break off a piece of it and then send for the rest again. Turning to the guy, Hephaestus realized that he was not listening to him. Or rather, he sits in a stupor, staring at one point. But then Hajong abruptly lowers his head down, bowing and shouting words of gratitude to God for paying him so well. Hephaestus laughed, said that there was nothing to thank him for, and asked the guy to get up. But Hajong replied that he couldn't because even his legs were paralyzed with joy. At that time, television broadcast that there was a partial collapse of tunnels in the Sori mines due to an earthquake. Fortunately, there were no casualties, but the mines are temporarily closed to the public. Thus, business owners at the entrance to the mine may lose income. The public is alarmed that the earthquake will cause new types of monsters to emerge from the gates. Then the TV turns off. Guild leader Song Jun asked Do Yun, who looked slightly beaten, how this could happen since the task was easy. Do Yun was the last to leave the mine, so he must know what happened. But the hunter only sighed heavily, and with a short pause, he replied that a giant golem had suddenly run at him. This news surprised Song Jung. Then Do Yun continued and said that he had seen the same courier there that they had seen in Tartarus. Song Sung was even more surprised. The thing was the last time they had seen this guy in Seoul, and now he was in the Suwon area. Do Yun then added that it seemed to him that the golem was running after this very courier. The leader said that this already looked too strange, and it was time to inquire about him. The fact that he was in these two dangerous places could indicate that this guy might be an unregistered high-rank hunter. Du Yun said that if an investigation is carried out, he is always ready to support his leader. Moreover, the hunter remembered the model and number of the moped, and you can also get a recording from CCTV cameras at the entrance to the dungeon. Song Jun supported his friend, saying that if he managed to find this guy, then let the hunter tell him that the guild leader Yang Won wanted to see him. After all, such a strong recruit can significantly strengthen the guild. In any case, Song Jun was glad that his friend was not injured in the dungeon, and told him not to worry about the closure of the mines, as he would personally deal with the matter. Before Yunu, it was infinitely pleasant to hear such words from his leader, because he was really worried about his condition. Then Do Yun said that he would follow his leader even into the very hell, for which Song Jung sincerely thanked him. But one question remained open, and Song Jun asked his friend if he had managed to get some heavenly steel. Du Yun completely lost the leader's task when he found himself in the mines and ran away from the golem. Therefore, the primary task was not completed. At this time, Hajong was immensely happy as he looked at his balance. He knew that this dangerous job was worth it because he now had as much as 500 million. You can start looking for better housing. For example, the Hotnicks receive at least 30 billion a year. If you don't take into account the cost of the pickaxe, the guy still made good money. 45 million won in just one day. Odnako Hajun is not sure how many more times the invisibility cap trick will go through. If suddenly he is noticed by monsters, everything can end terribly. The fear that eats the guy during missions tires him. Then Hajun decides to go to the store and look for something useful to fulfill orders. But after flipping through the catalog, he realized that everything there was either very expensive or absolutely useless. Also, these are all replicas that can most likely be used a maximum of 2 times. This statistic made Hajung think about not getting into fights with monsters at all. But then he finally noticed something worthwhile in his recommendations. It was a racer suit that was made specifically for delivery men. With its help, you can overcome any landscapes and obstacles. Depending on the level of the suit, the wearer receives an improvement in physical abilities and special skills. But the improvement is expensive, and the daily use in time is 3 minutes. Ha Zhang was perplexed, as the system hadn't shown him this before. However, you can understand how effective this suit is only by wearing it. But it cost 50,000 points. But when you think about it, compared to what the guy bought before, it can actually be a good investment. Moreover, everything that Ha Zhang had bought before did not let him down. Therefore, the guy still decides to buy a suit. Moreover, he may soon recoup this suit, as he will be able to take more orders. Almost immediately after pressing the buy button, the ordered suit materializes in the air. Taking it in his hands, Ha Jun realizes that there is no turning back. The money has been spent, and now it remains to try on the suit. After putting on the purchased item, Ha Zhang was satisfied with its quality and appearance, as he himself began to look much more professional. The guy thought that the suit would be uncomfortable, but in it he did not even feel that he was wearing anything, and the suit itself is quite warm. It feels like it's unusual clothes. After Ha Jun puts on the suit, he decides to try it out. At this time, a tired Do Yun wandered through the streets of the city and wondered where the courier had gone. He began to look for him from Suwon himself, and tips had already led him to Seoul. Even by the number of the moped, it was not possible to find its owner and his place of residence, as the police said that he had never been a violator. Starting to go crazy, Do Yun clutched his head right at the pedestrian crossing and began to think about how else to find this courier. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by the voice of a guy standing at the traffic light and telling Do Yun that it was already green light and it was time for him to cross. Do Yun apologized to the guy in the helmet, who, sitting on a moped, waited for him to cross the road. Already on the sidewalk, Do Yun noticed that the model of this guy's moped was exactly the same as the model he was looking for. Probably, it is quite popular. Then Do Yun begins to realize that the color of the moped, and even its damage in certain places, coincides with those he remembered in the dungeon. After Do Yun noticed the damage, he shifted his gaze to the number of the moped, and the puzzle in his head came together. The courier he had been looking for had just passed in front of him, and the hunter could miss it again. He rushed after the moped, but it was too late. Ha Zhang rushed forward too quickly. Do Yun did not despair and rushed after the moped. But he was already very tired, and there was less and less strength left to run. Suddenly, he heard the horn of a car behind him. Turning, he saw a taxi car in front of him and was delighted. Do Yun jumped into the back seat and shouted to the driver to go after the departing moped. But the driver was outraged by this behavior of the hunter. This only happens in movies, and that's why the man threw Do Yun out of his car. The hunter looked regretfully after the taxi car that sped away from him. But the guy had no choice, and he continued his way on his feet, trying to run faster. But it was no longer possible to run for a long time. The hunter was beginning to run out of steam. In the end, he fell on the sidewalk and lay down in a lair, gathering the glances of passers-by. One woman approached him and asked if everything was all right. But the guy could not say the words at first, but only made strange sounds. The woman then asked the guy if he was Do Yun Ha from the Yongwon Guild. The hunter immediately began to deny it, saying that the woman was mistaken because representatives of this guild cannot just walk the streets. Turning his head, Do Yun thought that he had already regretted chasing the moped, and the hunter has no idea where he went. Then there was a crash behind Do Yun. Everyone around, including the woman standing next to him, turned to the noise and screams. The hunter stood up and asked the woman what was happening. She also suggested that it was an earthquake. Looking at the place where the sounds were coming from, Do Yun realized that it was not without a courier. He exhaled, got up, and raced to the very spot where the collapse had supposedly occurred. Running to the park and not finding the courier with his eyes, the hunter began to look around. His instinct guided him and suggested that behind this roar was the courier he was looking for. Then an elderly couple turned to Do Yun. They told the hunter that it was better not to go to that place, as it was very dangerous, and even from the top of the mountain he could hear such sounds as if an avalanche was descending. Do Yun enthusiastically replied that they shouldn't worry. Although you can't tell from him, he is a hunter from the Yongwon Guild. Running away, the hunter shouted to the couple for the last time to leave for a safe place, despite all the attempts of the elderly people to stop him. Running to the place where the sound was coming from, Do Yun stopped and looked around. His strength was already running out, but he was serious about finding the guy on the moped. And then he noticed a huge boulder. But there was something about him that caught the hunter's attention. The stone was pierced through. There was a huge hole right in the center of the cobblestone. It seemed impossible. It is quite a large boulder, but it would be difficult to break it apart. B-rank hunters could easily blow it to pieces. However, not everyone can punch such a hole with such amazing accuracy. Surely it is some kind of magic or even divine powers. It only proved that it was necessary to catch that guy at all costs. At this time, Ha-jung was already finishing his dinner ordered at the cafe and enjoying his meal. He himself could not believe that he was able to punch such a huge hole in the boulder himself. He also managed to speed up, albeit for a couple of minutes. The new suit was able to significantly increase his physical abilities. Now the guy understood that he could easily enter any dungeon, and he would not be so scared. At this point, Ha-jung heard the notification sound again. It was not the same as before, but more like some Chinese instrument, rather than a new order. This time he received an address. The point was in the Bushin area. It seems that you will have to go to another dungeon again and not to Olympus. Scoring in the search for Bukeon dungeon, Ha-jun found what he needed. It was Hwago Mountain. The description said that it was located at a distance from Bushin. The mountain rising on the horizon resembles rather a large hill. It is unpopular due to the almost complete absence of monsters and the small amount of minerals. An ideal place for hunters who love hiking. Ha-jung realized that this was the dungeon, but since the delivery was not in a hurry, he decided to accept it tomorrow when the effect of the costume was updated. The guy stretched to stretch his legs. All this time, a girl in a cap was watching him behind the glass of the restaurant. It was a huntress from the Yongwon Guild, Irene. She chewed on a rice cake and watched the guy carefully. At this time, Seo Jung was talking to Do Yun. He noticed that it was the second time he had noticed the courier near the Noryongjin station. Do Yun enthusiastically agreed and said that they had every chance of catching him. Moreover, dozens of their hunters have already gone in search of the courier. Song Jun wondered how the hunters could find the guy because Do Yun is the only one who knows what he looks like. But the hunter said not to worry about it. After all, he drew a self-portrait of a guy on a moped and distributed it to everyone. The distinguishing features were the facts that he is very fast, has a lot of gadgets on the moped, and also crookedly drew his face from below. But after seeing these drawings, Song Jun became even more worried. He decided to ask Do Yun if he was sure that this guy was stronger than him. Do Yun exclaimed in bewilderment that the boulder photos he had taken proved it. The hunter is sure that this is the work of the courier, and he does not know such strong hunters who could do such a thing. The leader replied that in that case, they needed to hurry up before the Black Dragon Guild got ahead of them. While the Yongwon Guild had established itself as the best in the country, the second highest ranked guild was also not far behind. In the past 3 years, the Black Dragon Guild had risen significantly. They seek to establish control over the dungeons and engage in bribery to conceal their illegal activities. This guild is constantly getting involved in scandals, using any means to expand its influence. Song Jun remarked that they couldn't allow the Black Dragon Guild to take the top position. Moreover, they have been behaving quite suspiciously lately. We need to find out what they are up to. Do Yun said that he would follow the order and deal with everything, even if it was not easy. The next day, Ha-jun arrived in Bucheon to Mount Seongju. He was on his moped, dressed in his suit. He wore an invisibility helmet on his head. Apparently, there was some kind of festival going on there, as there were a lot of people around again. This is strange, since they wrote on the internet that this dungeon is not very popular. At this point, a man shouted at Ha-jung to stop. The guy was afraid that someone had noticed him because he was in equipment. But when he drove closer, the courier noticed that the man was shouting not at him, but at the guy next to him, saying why he was just wandering around here. In response, the boy replied that he had seen that he had learned that the Black Dragon Guild was recruiting new members. Ha-jung breathed a sigh of relief. It was a false alarm. The man shouted to someone behind him that a new participant had arrived who was going to the dungeon. Ha-jung thought to himself that he had heard rumors that their guild was taking over dungeons, but the guy didn't think that he would see it with his own eyes. It is strange that even hunters' associations do nothing. But this is not his business. The guy, bypassing the guards, drove into the dungeon. The dungeon of Mount Hwago looked quite beautiful and at first glance, safe. The courier continued his way, following the directions from the navigator. Almost reaching his destination, it seemed strange to the guy that there was no one there. The navigator led him to the foot of the mountain. Ha-jung was afraid that he would have to climb to the very top to hand over the order. Various terrible thoughts crept into my head. What if the mountain turns into a monster, like last time, and runs after him? But Ha-jung gathered his thoughts and thought that he would have to trust the suit. He hoped that the equipment would help him deal with the monsters. The guy took off his helmet and was about to climb up, but then someone called him from the bushes. Ha began to turn around and look for the source of the sound. But at first, he didn't even notice anyone. Then the voice rang out again and asked the guy to look down. After doing this, Ha almost screamed in surprise and even fear, because he definitely did not expect to see such a thing. After all, a real talking monkey head crawled out of the bushes to meet him. The head told the guy not to be so scared, like, has he never seen a talking monkey? Ha then asked if the creature had ordered delivery. It replied that it was really him, and the guy in the hat told him about the courier who spoke positively about him. Ha was very surprised, and the monkey head sticking out from under the rock continued to say that she needed someone who could deliver something for her. The guy agreed. Then the head said that the courier could call him the handsome monkey king or the victorious Buddha, but he would prefer to be called a great sage or a close to heaven. Ha got confused about these strange and long names, trying to repeat them. Then, the creature stuck under the boulder sighed tiredly and said to call him simply Sun Wukong. Ha decided to ask Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, why he was there. A huge boulder crushed his entire body, and only his head remained outside. Sun Wukong then replied that this was his punishment, since the Jade Emperor, whom the king called the Old Snarl, had done it to him because of the peaches. Sun Wukong wanted to check if the peaches were ripe, and ate a couple of pieces, for which he was buried here. Han Zhang then asked what he wanted. The king said that there was nothing special there. You just had to go forward, and there you could stumble upon a large pile of junk. A box would be hidden in it, and Sun Wukong needed it. A request appeared in the application. A box in a pile of junk is not the clearest and most understandable request, but the application showed that you need to drive 6 miles to the order. It's not that far away. Han Zhang said that he would be back soon and set off. The Monkey King was glad that his request was granted and smiled after the courier. At this time, the candidates to join the Black Dragon Guild were already trembling with fear as they prepared to fight the boss of Mount Wago. In front of the guys sat a huge stone monster with a large yin-yang badge in the center of its chest. This was his first hypostasis, 8 trigrams. Behind the candidate boys was the leader of the Black Dragon Guild. Hiding her face behind a fan, she told the guys that she should be afraid of the monster. There is always a way out. The leader of the Black Dragon Guild was ranked 60th in the Juahan Mythical Hunter rankings. An aura of danger, cunning, and beauty emanated from this woman. She thought about how although Yongwan's guild had eclipsed them by clearing the abyss, if her guild could defeat this monster, then she would quickly bypass the rival guild. The leader had only one goal, to take the place of the best guild. Then the woman ordered her men to start an attack, and they immediately began to follow her command. One of the warriors had a strange and bad feeling, although the monster had not even begun to move yet. Then the monster began to rise abruptly. There was a feeling that an earthquake had begun since the boss was huge in size. A bright red light that looked like an eye lit up on the monster's head. After that, the creature seemed to really come to life and roar loudly. The soldiers were very frightened. They did not understand how to rebuff him. It seemed impossible. Hunter candidates were not warned at all that they would have to fight a boss. Then the man in glasses ordered everyone to take their places. And he also added that everyone who gives up positions will be killed. The guys were worried. They did not understand how they could defeat this monster with the junk in their hands. Wooden shields and small blunt swords did not inspire confidence. Then one of the candidates gathered himself and boldly shouted to everyone to take their places. Everyone turned to him in surprise. The guy continued to speak. He understood that if they did not launch an attack or were distracted, they would be crushed into a cake. You should never let your guard down. This is what he said to his comrades. Although the guys were afraid, they were shaking with fear. But their comrade was able to cheer them up a little, and now they were also preparing for an attack. The man with glasses, the deputy guild leader, asked her if these guys would be able to handle it, to which the woman replied that she needed to observe first. At this time, Hajong was following his order on the navigator. Suddenly, he felt the ground shake. The guy thought that an earthquake had begun. He was very worried and even a little frightened. Then, in front of him, he saw creatures that looked like monkeys running away from something. If the monsters are already running away, then something serious has definitely happened. Clouds of smoke could be seen in the distance. All this is not good. But Hajun knew that he was wearing a suit. He could help him. Therefore, the guy decided to check what was happening there and went to the place where the smoke was coming from. At this time, the monster continued to smash the army of hunters. No one managed to cope with him. The archers shot hundreds of arrows at him, but it was absolutely useless. The monster didn't care. The guy who was trying to cheer up his comrades had already begun to droop himself, as nothing worked. One of the guys that Hajun met at the entrance to the dungeon turned to the guild leader, asking her for protection, because he had come here to join the guild, not to fight. Jua Han only replied that if they could get out alive, then the guild's reputation would skyrocket. The guy looked at her in disbelief, but then the fist of the deputy guild leader flew into his face and he fell. Jua Han said that if they had come to help the guild clear the dungeon, they had to fight. It wasn't that difficult. The other hunters continued to attack the monster, which easily repelled their attacks. One of the candidates dealt a strong blow to the monster. Because of this, there was a strong noise and a shockwave. The rest of the guys continued to step on the boss, but he had already begun to fall and eventually fell to the ground with a crash. The guys were very happy. They already thought that they managed to defeat the boss. Most of all, they were happy that they were able to survive this battle. But then I heard a voice behind me, saying that this was not the end. The monster's red eye lit up brightly again, and it began to come to life and move again. Moreover, the monster seemed to have become stronger. Gears appeared in his chest, causing a red light to glow there, the same as in the monster's head. The guild leader, covering her face with a fan, said that it was time for the second round. The monster was already able to stand up, and it looked even scarier and more powerful than before. It made loud and eerie noises similar to a roar. Ha Zhong was watching all these from behind, hiding in the bushes. The monster and the hunters did not notice him. The courier was shocked. He could not understand what it was or what was going on here. Taking off his helmet, he continued to watch. At this time, Do Yun, the captain of the first team, was still trying to find the courier. Yesterday, he was in Suwon. Today, he is heading to Buxian. The hunter thought that at such a pace, he could go around the entire province of Gyeonggi. This courier chooses two different points. Approaching the entrance to the dungeon, Do Yun was surprised that there were no guards at the entrance, as is usually the case. But then a man from the Black Dragon Guild came out from behind the bushes and shouted at the hunter, saying why he was wandering around just like that. But Do Yun, despite the man's impressive size and menacing tone of voice, didn't even slow down and asked the man where he came from. At first, the man with a threatening voice told the hunter to watch his tongue, but then recognized him as Ha Do Yun, who was already angry. He recognized the man from the association. He was only a black dragon rat. Do Yun nudged the man with his shoulder, rudely telling him to get out of the way. He hesitated and was so frightened that he could not even answer. The man tried to tell Do Yun that the dungeon was not safe now, but he had already confidently entered it. Do Yun realized that if the Black Dragon Guild had bribed the people from the association to control the entrance to this gate, then it meant only one thing. They wanted to destroy the boss of the dungeon. Do Yun sped up and rushed towards the battle. He had to warn them all that the Yongwan Guild had stopped raiding the gates of Mount Hua for a reason. At this time, the monster towered over the members of the Black Dragon Guild. The ninth trigram becomes really enraged when it moves on to the second phase. Ha Zhong, who was watching the monster in horror, knew that it wasn't a pile of junk that he needed to find, but a huge and insanely dangerous creature. The guy thought that even with his mythical costume, it would be very difficult for him to cope with it. He closed his eyes in frustration, and tears almost flowed from his eyes. He did not know what to do now, but then he noticed a woman with a fan. He knew her. She was the leader of the Black Dragon. Then, a man in glasses, standing next to her, grabbed one of the guys by the hood and dragged him towards the monster. He promised that he was ready to fight and begged to be released. But the man was adamant. He dragged the guy right onto the monster. All this time he asked not to kill him, but there were no emotions on the man's face. Ha Zhong, who had been watching this whole scene, was trying to figure out what the guild member wanted to do with this guy. At this time, the man lowered the guy down to the burning chest of the monster, from which the guy's clothes also caught fire. He began to scream in pain. The guy with tears in his eyes asked to let him go, because he could burn now. But the man replied that it was not his problem, and continued to hold the guy over the fire. He also said that it would be better for the guy to die in battle. But as soon as he finished this sentence, the fabric of the guy's clothes slipped out of his hands. At the same moment, a guy in a helmet hit his face. The man jumped a few meters. The guild leader, once again covering half of her face with a fan, looked at it all in bewilderment. She definitely did not expect such an outcome of events. She wondered who this guy was. After all, he had managed to knock out a B-rank hunter with one blow. He was already lying unconscious on the ground. After catching the guy, Ha-jong took him in his arms and lowered him to the ground. The courier also inquired about the condition of the guy he saved. He replied that he was really very grateful to his savior, but that he had better hid his eyes right now because it was not entirely reasonable. Turning around, Ha-jong saw an entire army behind him and realized that his act was indeed reckless. Now it may come to an end. Ha-jong knew that he could just take the box and run away. In the meantime, all these hunters would have been detained by this huge monster. But he told the guy not to worry because he simply could not watch someone being killed in this way. He is not to blame for this. The guy thanked his savior once again. Then, the voice of the guild leader rang out. She shouted at her hunters, as instead of attacking the stranger, they stood up as if rooted to the ground. But Ha-jong had already decided everything for himself. Since everything has gone downhill, he will see it through to the end. The action of the costume should last another 2 minutes. The guy understood that now he had no choice and would have to try to do what he had planned. Otherwise, he would not leave here. The guild leader was angry because they were so close to defeating the monster, and this guy in the helmet ruined everything. Then a man approached her and, asking for further instructions, asked if it was necessary to gather archers. But the leader answered in the negative. First of all, she ordered to collect firewood. This was the key to defeating the 9th trigram. At the moment of transition, from the first phase to the second, the monster is paralyzed for a short time, as it is now. All that remained to be done was to throw the victim into the fiery core, and it would be all over. But this guy ruined everything. At this point, the man pointed at Ha-jong and told his leader to pay attention to the guy. Ha-jong at this time flew over the monster and began to think about what could be done to destroy it. Then he noticed a pothole in his head. It seemed like a good place to strike. It looked like a monster's weak point. Then Ha-jong took aim and struck directly at the monster's head. The blow was really crushing. The monster roared. The guild leader was terrified. She did not understand what this idiot was doing there. He doesn't seem to understand that he can wake up the 9th trigram now. Then she ordered her army to stop the guy at all costs. She doesn't care even if her men kill him. Then the archers drew arrows and shot them at the guy. Ha-jong at this time continued to hit the chosen place in the hope of breaking it, but then his suit, sensing danger, began to dodge arrows. Thus, the arrows could not hit the guy. He was surprised that these people really wanted to kill him. Then one of the guild members called out to the deputy. He didn't know what to do because the guy easily dodged all their arrows. It was an amazing sight. It feels like this guy has eyes on the back of his head. However, Ha-jong was already starting to get tired of these strange movements. One arrow hit directly into the hole from which the red light was emanating. The monster roared loudly again. The man from the guild now saw only one way out: go upstairs and try to knock the guy down in other ways. Then he sent his troops to attack. They listened to him and began to get closer to the monster. Ha-jong didn't understand why they were so stubborn. They had already fired so many arrows that this golem seemed to have hair. But then a strange sound was heard. Ha-jong couldn't understand what was happening, but he only noticed the guild leader's fan falling to the ground. Looking at the golem, she could only say that they were finished. The second phase has been completed, and now the monster will gain unimaginable strength. It began to burn with fire, and Ha-jong began to jump amusingly as he began to burn heavily from below. The hunters and other guys below looked at him in bewilderment, and even in this situation, some tried not to laugh. But it did not last long. The monster took a huge step with its stone fiery leg directly towards the guild army. He stepped on a whole crowd of people, crushing them into cakes. It was a horrible sight for all the survivors. The guild leader and the man next to her were also shocked as they looked at all this. They didn't know what to do now, because the monster had killed their entire army. The man asked the leader what they should do now. But she replied that she did not know since they could not do anything. This monster will turn them all into ashes. No one can cope with such strength and power. And then, unexpectedly for everyone, Ha-jun appears out of nowhere, and with all his strength, strikes the monster in its weak point. The leader was surprised that this guy was still alive, and carefully observed his actions. There was very little time left before the end of the costume. Just a few seconds. Then Ha-jong swung, and a second before losing his strength, he struck the final blow. The blow was unimaginable. The monster's head literally exploded from him. There was a loud noise. All this was observed by Do-yoon, who had already arrived at the scene of the battle. He was shocked by what he saw. The force of the blow was simply enormous. Could this courier really be able to defeat the dungeon boss alone? It seemed impossible. A simple courier would definitely not be able to do this. No one could if he were an ordinary person or even a strong hunter. Moreover, his fighting style was very similar to Do-yoon's own style. Because of this, the hunter already felt sympathy for the courier. Then Do-yoon jumped out of his hiding place and decided to approach the place of battle. He never thought that he would meet this courier here, next to the Black Dragon Guild. The hunter was very determined. He would find him and bring him to the Yongwon Guild at all costs. At this time, the leader of the Black Dragon Guild, trying to clear her throat from the rising dust, said that she would never have thought that this loser would be able to defeat the 9th trigram. Her subordinate approached her and asked what they should do now. The woman replied that as soon as the dust settled, it was necessary to grab the guy who defeated the boss. He had obviously spent a lot of energy to defeat the 9th trigram, so even if he was an unregistered high-rank hunter, it wouldn't be difficult to grab him. The leader also said that this guy would answer for preventing the Black Dragon's raid, and she really wanted to see this impudent man. But before she could even finish, more dust rose in front of them from the hard landing of some object around them. As it began to subside, everyone saw the young man landing right in the center of the battlefield. It was Do-yoon. Looking up, he feigned interest in how the Black Dragons were doing. The guild was surprised to see the hunter from Yongwon. Do-yoon had already understood what these scoundrels were up to, and he looked very angry and confident, standing in front of a whole crowd of opponents. He voiced his thoughts about how the Black Dragon Guild had lured a newcomer to sacrifice him to the golem. By the standards of a hunter, this was a very low act. The leader didn't understand how Do-yoon could know that they were here, and in almost hysterics, she ordered everyone to prepare for battle. Pointing at the hunter, she introduced him to everyone as their enemy, Ha Do-yoon of the Yongwon Guild. And she also told her subordinates to be more careful. The detachment prepared for an attack. Do-yoon thought at this moment that although he had made a spectacular appearance and carried himself well all this time, there were more hunters from the Black Dragon Guild than he had thought. But then he remembered the courier. The hunter understood that he was somewhere nearby and needed to be found. Then some guy ran up to the guild leader and said that they were having problems again. Indignantly, she asked what had happened again. The guy said in a breathless voice that the man in the helmet had disappeared and no one could find him. This confused both the leader and Do-yoon, who was standing in front of her. Had they missed it again? As the woman shouted indignantly that it seemed impossible to disappear after such an explosion, Do-yoon stared at one point in disappointment. He had missed his target again. Standing in front of the crowd of Black Dragon Guild guys, he began to realize that he had only gotten involved in this fight in vain, since now he would have to waste his strength. At this time, Hajong, having put on his helmet, was already on his way to his customer. Remembering what had happened, the guy thought that this could be his last adventure. If he had been gone, he could have woken up on Olympus, but not from the fact that he had successfully made the delivery. Although most likely if he did die, he would end up in a completely different heavenly realm. As he continued on his way, Hajong himself couldn't understand what was happening to him. He is not even a hunter, so why did he get involved in this fight and decide to help the guy they tried to kill? It's not worth doing this anymore. Driving a little further, Hajong noticed Mount Seongju on the horizon. It was strange that he could just see her, as if the gate to the dungeon had disappeared. Then the guy thought that perhaps the dungeon disappeared because he killed its boss. The gates, which had not been cleared for a long time, materialized in the dense world in the form of dungeons, so there was always an opportunity to enter there again and again. However, passes to the dungeons were given only to carefully checked hunters. Well, or connections. But this time, the dungeon was cleared not even by a hunter, and even more so, not registered, but an ordinary courier. Hajong hoped that this wouldn't cause any problematic reaction. Then the guy suddenly wondered what he was risking his life for right now. He had already forgotten that he was going to that place for an order. When he reached the foot of the mountain, Hajong got off the moped. The Monkey King was glad that the courier had returned, but he thought that he would do it faster. Then, almost hysterically, Hajong began to explain what he had been through. To fulfill this order, Then Sun Wukong asked him to calm down and calmly tell him everything. Ha Zhang began by saying that the pile of junk was not at all what he had imagined. A pile of this scrap metal turned out to be a large robot golem, which is so huge that the top of its head almost scrapes the sky. And that's not counting the laser beam that almost burned the guy to ashes. Then Sun Wukong exclaimed, saying that it was impossible. He wondered who could make the 9th trigram so angry. Was Ha Zhang sure that he hadn't provoked him without noticing it? The thing of the 9th trigram is not inclined to move at all, if it is not provoked, not angered, and, in principle, not touched. Ha Zhang then realized that if the people from the Black Dragon Guild hadn't come to this place, he wouldn't have had to go through all this horror. Ha Zhang was very angry. The scoundrels from the Black Dragon forced him to fight the golem. If it were up to him, the guy would sweep them all away with one blow. The courier did not understand how these people dared to interfere with his work. His emotions were on the verge of breaking down, but his thoughts were interrupted by the Monkey King. Sun Wukong said that the guy seemed to be inclined to the fact that because of such difficulties, he could not fulfill the order and get the necessary box, because with the rabies of the trigram, this is impossible. But Ha Zhang interrupted him with a sharp denial and said that he had fulfilled his order and brought the box. Sun Wukong was perplexed. He did not understand how the guy managed to do it. But Ha Zhang replied that he had just broken his head and it was over. This made the king even more tense. But after Ha Zhang put out the necessary box, Sun Wukong was no longer interested in anything else. Then the courier asked what was in this box, because of which he risked his life. The metal box itself was similar to the one usually used in Chinese restaurants. Sun Wukong then began to laugh. His laughter grew louder and more ominous. He remembered how he had almost killed this monster in the heavens, and now he was able to slay it alone by an ordinary mortal. The Monkey King asked what the boy's name was. Ha Zhongli introduced himself, after which Sun Wukong stretched out his hands to the box. He noted to himself that his courier was not so simple, but now he needed to do something more important. Then, a huge red laser beam flew into the box, which even blinded Ha Zhang for a moment. The metal box shattered, raising clouds of dust after the explosion. Settling on the ground, Ha Zhang tried to understand what was happening. It seemed to Yes that he saw that some kind of staff had fallen out of the box. And then, in the scattered dust, the guy saw this staff in the hand of the Monkey King. He told the guy that he was now his debtor, because if he did not agree to help him, then he would have waited a long time for the Sangzan. And who knows how much longer Sun Wukong would have stayed on this mountain if it hadn't been for Ha Zhang's help. In the hand of the Monkey King was the same golden staff. Now he is free. After his release, Sun Wukong decides to quickly escape from this place before the Jade Emperor finds out about everything. Whistling, he gathered a huge, dusty, and dense cloud next to him, which he was able to climb and was already planning to fly away. As he rose into the sky, the king shouted that if fate brought him together again, then he and Ha Zhang would definitely meet again, but for now, it was time for him to meet. But the guy suddenly began to shout after the king to stop, because he did not pay the guy for his delivery, and this was the most important thing for him in this mission. But Ha Zhang didn't even have time to finish speaking, as a medium-sized pouch with something obviously solid inside flew into his face. And from above, Sun Wukong's voice was heard, saying that he, being a great prophet and equal to the Celestials, was alien to pettiness, because he had already paid Ha Zhang. And in this bag, there is a small reward for his efforts. Ha Zhang was very curious about what was there. After that, the Monkey King shouted a last farewell in the direction of the guy and rushed through the sky in an unknown direction. Ha Zhang wanted to shout to the king and ask if there would be a tip for him, but his trail had already cooled down. Then the guy opened the bag, and seeing its contents was very surprised. It wasn't like a regular tip. After returning home, Ha Zhang was eating noodles while watching TV. The news reported that yesterday afternoon, there were shocking reports that the Black Dragon Guild was allegedly cleaning up Mount Haogo using special tactics during the boss's attack. Ha Jun stared at the screen with an indignant look. He knew the whole truth and understood who had really killed the boss. The host's voice went on to say that the dark dealings of the Black Dragon Guild were on public display, and it was good that everyone knew about them. Next, we decided to take a couple of words from the novice hunter who was present at the scene. A young guy appeared on the screen with a bandage on his arm and treated abrasions on his face. He said that no one warned them that they would have to fight the boss. Then the presenter said that there were rumors that a man in a helmet suddenly appeared there. The guy immediately perked up and confirmed this fact, and also added that this guy saved him just at the moment when he was about to be thrown into the fire pit. And it was this guy who struck down the boss. Without him, they would not have been able to survive. Hajun continued to eat and listen to the interview with interest. Drinking food, the courier listened as the guy he rescued continued to tell the story of his rescue and praise the unknown guy. Hajong thought that the main thing was that he had kept his identity a secret and saved these people. Although much more important for him was his salary for the completed order. Current balance, 95,300 coins. From this delivery, the guy earned 70,000 won. He had a feeling that after the fight with the monster, he deserved more. But if you translate all this into real money, you get as much as 700 million won. With that amount of money, he can afford any kind of housing in Seoul. Moreover, the courier also received a special award. At first, of course, he did not understand why he needed it, but then he looked at how to apply it, and it turned out that the thing was very useful. In his hand were the locks of a stone monkey, the great sage Sun Wukong from Mount Huaguo. If you put them in the palm of your hand and blow slightly, you can summon a clone of Sun Wukong for a moment. You can use them only once. This opportunity intrigued Hajun. Lately, he has often walked on a knife's edge, fighting various monsters. Therefore, even if he can only summon a clone, such a possibility will still not be superfluous. It's really cool, it's like having a second life. Therefore, he will definitely take advantage of it somehow. At this point, Hajong heard the notification sound again. This was a new delivery request. The guy was happy and grabbed the phone. This order was just in time. Therefore, today we will have to work a little more. The guy enthusiastically went to a new order. At this time, the leader of the Yongwon Guild, Songjun, was already in the hospital. He was rushing to his comrade as fast as he could. Running into Do Yoon's room with the most worried expression on his face, he immediately began to ask how he was doing. Do Yoon was on the phone at this time, but when he saw his master, he put down the phone, surprised at his arrival. He thought that Song Jung had gone to Busan yesterday. Therefore, it was strange that the leader was now standing in front of him, even in such a worried and breathless state. Song Jung replied that he really should have been in Busan, but he couldn't stay there for long, especially considering the fact that Do Yoon was in the hospital because of him. But the hunter immediately began to justify the leader, because he did not see his guilt in what happened at all. Do Yoon believed that it was all his own fault, as he himself needed to assess the situation before acting. Do Yoon further added that he himself was not careful enough. Because of this, his face is now covered in band-aid, cotton wool, and bandages. But it was not so important. Do Yoon said that the fools from the Black Dragon Guild had indeed tried to win over the hunter from the Yongwon Guild to their side. Song Jun thought that it was not worth letting Do Yoon alone on this mission. Next time, he would definitely send Irene with him. And for what the Black Dragon Guild was trying to do, Song Jun would deal with them on his own next time. Guild leader Yongwon was angry at this news. Then Song Jun decided to ask Do Yoon how he was feeling at the moment and whether he was okay. Do Yoon looked at the leader with eyes full of regret. The hunter replied to Song Jun that the doctors had told him that the situation was not very good. The injuries were too bad. Song Jong was shocked. He had already thought that Do Yoon would end his hunting career because of this incident. A lot of emotions flashed through his head, from a feeling of regret to fear. But then, Do Yoon makes a stupid expression on his face and blurts out right in the leader's face, saying that it was a joke, after which he asked Song Jun if he bought into his game. While the leader was recovering, Do Yoon explained that, according to the doctors, the fracture was not so terrible, so it would not take long to recover. At this point, Do Yoon came to his senses and almost resentfully began to ask Song Jun about whether he really thought that he would resign due to a couple of injuries. This is not logical. With emotions boiling inside him, the leader walked up to the hunter, lightly grabbed his cheek, and pulled it away, saying that now was the time for Do Yoon to resign. But the hunter, taking his words seriously, exclaimed to the whole house that he would never leave the guild, because he promised to be with his leader until the very end. After talking a little longer, Do Yoon told Sung Jun that he had seen the same guy on a scooter in the dungeon, and that he had single-handedly dealt with the boss. The guild leader was surprised and didn't believe it at first, but Do Yoon convinced him, saying that he had seen it with his own eyes, how the guy appeared out of nowhere and attacked the monster, cutting a huge hole in its head. At the same time, he did not use weapons, but defeated the boss purely through a fistfight. Therefore, Do-yun thinks that this guy is somehow similar to him, because the hunter also practically does not use weapons in battle. Do-yun then told Song-jun that he had heard that some of the boys had been sent to Noryang-jin and decided to find out how it had gone and whether they had found this courier guy. The leader replied with sadness in his voice that despite the fact that their people had scoured all the surroundings, they did not find the guy. Do-yun was surprised by this turn of events. How does this guy manage to hide from so many people and, most importantly, how to catch him? The leader continued, saying that they tracked the cameras as he entered the alley, and then he seemed to evaporate. But Song-jung did not know that the courier not only traveled around the earthly world, but could also teleport to the mythical one, as it was now. Ha-jong was on his way to another order, and hiccuped, thinking that someone remembered him with an unkind word. He drove and felt a sharp drop in temperature, for at first there were blue clouds around, but as they approached the house of Hephaestus, they were replaced by dark stone roads. Finally, Ha-jong reached his original goal and rode up to the abode of God. But there was no one around. Going inside, the young man found Hephaestus at work on an anvil. Sparks flew around as usual, work was in full swing. Ha-jong decided to sit and wait for Hephaestus to finish his work and then ask about the order. Then the guy began to yawn and realized that he was very sleepy. Perhaps this was due to the sudden heat. It caused Ha-jong to have very warm feelings inside. They reminded him of something dear and warm, as if he were in his mother's arms. Ha-jong was leaning against something hard and was about to fall asleep when he suddenly heard a voice. He was not quite gentle and warm, and he was also interested in how the guy got here. When Ha-jong woke up, he noticed that he was leaning on Hephaestus in a half-sleep. Not yet completely recovered from sleep, he recoiled from God and asked in bewilderment how he became his mother. Hephaestus laughed and assumed that the guy was a little tired since he imagined such a thing. But the delivery that the courier has to make is quite long. Hephaestus decided to clarify, is it sure that the guy will cope with the task? Leaning on his chair, Ha-jong reflected on the fact that such long deliveries usually give large bonuses, and this motivated him. Then, the courier replied that he was ready to travel around the globe, at least if he was paid a decent amount for it. Hearing this, Hephaestus rejoiced. He knew that Ha-jong could be relied on. The god took in his hands and presented the guy with a large cane with the head of a snake, and also said that for its manufacture, he used the same heavenly steel that the courier had delivered. Hephaestus also added that the order must be delivered today, so you need to hurry. Hearing this, Ha-jong said that in that case, it was time for him to leave. Looking at the large cane again, the guy asked where it should be taken. Hephaestus replied that the order had come from Egypt and had to be delivered to the pyramid. Hearing this, Ha-jong was shocked. He wondered why Hephaestus hadn't sent it as a package. And in general, how do the pyramids relate to Greek mythology? Making a nice face, Hephaestus replied that he was so good that people turned to him for help, not only on Olympus. But in Ha-jun's opinion, the cute expression didn't suit God at all. Therefore, the courier took a cane and, promising to deliver it in a couple of hours, ran to fulfill the order. And he himself thought about whether he would be able to get to Egypt in a day. But then the voice of Hephaestus was heard abruptly, shouting to the guy to stop. God forgot to warn the courier about one important detail. Hephaestus said that the customer to whom the guy is going to deliver the order is quite fastidious. Therefore, God took it upon himself to find Ha-jun-woo a helper. The guy turned around, surprised by this news. And immediately a girl's voice was heard from the side, which greeted those present. A girl came out of the darkness to Ha-jong, who said that she was there on Cupid's orders, and her name was Lucio. She came to serve Hephaestus. Already on the way to the goal, Ha-jong was glad that the pyramid was within the mythical realm, so he would not have to go to Egypt. Moreover, the road was made of beautiful clouds, and you don't have to hang out in traffic jams in them. This delivery promised to be one of the easiest courier missions. But the annoying little nymph Lucio whined on the road that she had been deceived. The nymph thought that she would help Hephaestus and not ride with a man on some wreck. Ha-jong was pretty tired of it during this time. The guy asked the nymph to be silent as she talked too much, and in the context he called her a small girl, to which Lucio, who always spoke of herself in the third person, replied to him that he did not dare to call her petty since she was very tall for a nymph. Sitting on the moped, Lucio caused Hajun physical discomfort by kicking him. The guy was insanely angry at the fact that Hephaestus had assigned this infuriating child to him. An hour ago, this girl introduced herself as a nymph who had come on the orders of Cupid. Despite her small stature, she looked too self-confident. Turning to Hephaestus, Hajong gave him a questioning look, as if this girl was going to be his assistant. To which Hephaestus replied that it could definitely be useful. Lucio was already slightly aggressive and asked the person, referring to Hajun, to observe manners and not look down on her just because she was a nymph. Hephaestus added that despite the fact that he trusts the courier, he cannot deny that he is not so good at mythology. But Lucio is well versed in everything, so he will definitely be able to help. Hajong assured Hephaestus that he did not have to worry about anything and that they would handle everything, and then set off with his partner. But she still did not allow him to ride calmly. Picking her nose, the nymph whined that she was bored and did not understand why she was helping a stupid person. Kicking Hajong in the back once again, Lucio asked him how long they had to go. But the guy did not answer her. Because of this, Lucio began to annoy him even more. Hajong tried to hold on with the last of his strength so as not to fall on the nymph. The guy didn't understand why he got this splinter. Turning to the nymph, Hajong warned her that if she did not want him to leave her with the delivery, then it was better for the nymph to sit quietly and not distract him. Then Hajong would say that she had coped with the task given to her. But the nymph did not agree with this condition, as she believed that such an act would tarnish her honor. If we delve into the story of Lucio, we can tell about her that when she was at Dachauer High School, she missed 2 grades. She then went on to study at the prestigious Streamwater University and became an elite nymph. And now, without stopping, she accompanies an ordinary courier. And he also angered the nymph, who, because of her anger, did not stop screaming. Then, during another influx of emotions and phrases, something small and round flies into Lucio's open mouth. She pauses mid-sentence, trying to figure out what happened. Terrified, she screams and asks Hajun, "What is it?" The guy, once again noting that the nymph was too loud, replied that it was just candy. Hajong went on to add that he would give Lucio more candy if she sat quietly and kept her head down. After chewing the candy, the nymph was shocked. She had never tasted anything tastier. Lucio had the impression that there were angels dancing in her mouth, and now she was ready to fulfill any conditions just to get another candy. But her silence did not last long. Lucio began to dig into the human again, saying that she hoped he wasn't lying and would really give more. Hajong told her not to worry, as he keeps his word. And so the nymph silently chews the candy, and Hajun, once again convinced that the way to the child's heart lies through the stomach, can continue to ride. According to the navigator, there were 800 meters left to the target. Now, in relative silence, namely without Lucio's constant screaming and whining, Hajong was finally able to concentrate on the road. But suddenly, seeing a strange and large-scale obstacle in front of him, Hajong suddenly slowed down in surprise and raised clouds of dust around him. While the guy was trying to come to his senses, Lucio, who was sitting in the back, cleared her throat and reminded the man that she had been sitting quietly, as promised, so now she was waiting for another candy. Hearing this, Hajong almost cried. At that moment, he just wanted to hit her on the head so that she would begin to understand at least a little what was happening. He seized the nymph and, lifting her up in front of him, asked why she had not warned of the danger ahead. Lucio replied that the guy himself told her to be silent, so she did not warn her. Then a loud, terrible voice sounded from above, which addressed the intruders. Lucio was very frightened, and the voice went on, saying that if they wanted to go further, they had to guess his riddle. Turning around, Hajong realized that it was a huge sphinx, the same stone mythical lion with a human head. This terrible monster makes a riddle to anyone who comes close and devours whole those who answer incorrectly. The Sphinx is a relative of Typhon, a powerful and monstrous giant, as well as the same beast that once slew Zeus and almost destroyed all of Olympus. Of course, the Sphinx is not that strong, but Hajun is not a legendary hero either, so you should not go against him with only a nymph. Hajong once again felt that he was going to certain death. The Sphinx looked very impressive and creepy. Chuika told the guy that blows were useless against this monster. But there was no time to think. Then the courier stretched and walked forward. In his mind, he thought that he should be paid well for this. The nymph called out to Hajong as he walked confidently forward. She understood the danger in front of them. But the guy was unstoppable. He replied to the nymph that he was going to solve the riddle of the Sphinx. The nymph, with fear in her voice, said that the Sphinx could swallow Hajun if he made a mistake, and he would die in a seething stomach. Hajun replied to Lucio, who was trying to stop him, that he would not die because he was not that stupid. Therefore, there is no need to worry. Moreover, his mystery was preserved by everyone. It is so popular that it is simply impossible to make a mistake. Although the guy is universal, he will not solve the other riddles of the Sphinx. But in this case, he has Sun Wukong's lock of hair with him. Suddenly, something goes wrong. Here again, the voice of the Sphinx was heard, asking if the guy was ready to solve the riddle, to which Hajung replied that he did not have much time and hurried the monster. The nymph was worried after she realized that the courier really accepted the riddle, because the rules were too strict, guess or die. But then she pulled herself together and told herself that she, Lucio, the incredible nymph, must solve the riddle by any means, and joined Hajun. Then the Sphinx began his riddle. Hajun was initially sure that the answer would be the word man. In all the films, the Sphinx asks exactly this: who walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 3 in the evening? Obviously, this is a person. The guy had seen this riddle on TV so many times and remembered it all perfectly. Now he will definitely solve the riddle even before the Sphinx has time to finish. But from the monster's mouth came the following: what sound does a duck make when it falls? Here, Hajun hesitated. He definitely did not expect such a riddle. Lucio began to go over in his head everything she knew about ducks. But other than what they were saying, nothing else came to her mind. She realized that she did not know the answer. She was very sorry that she could not help. All this time happened through a magic ball behind the woman. Noticing the father of the arrivals, she was very curious why they came here. At this time, the Sphinx was already insisting that Hajun solve his riddle with what sound a duck makes when he stumbles and falls. The guy noted that this strange riddle, in principle, is more like a stupid joke. The answer is too obvious. Although this is the Sphinx, this question may have an unexpected twist. Need to think a little more. Moreover, the Sphinx, making a cute little face, added that the guy has 3 minutes to solve the mystery. The monster himself thought that he had overestimated the man standing in front of him. Lucio, meanwhile, had already begun to panic. She was only convinced of the words of all those who told her that the riddles of the Sphinx could not be solved. Even she, the mega elite, Lucio, has no answer. She was ready to come to terms with the fact that this Sphinx would eat her, and all because of this stupid little man, Ha-Jun. Thinking about the answer, Lucio remembered her studies and the question she asked the professor about the riddles of the Sphinx. She asked him whether the riddles of the Sphinx were really impossible to guess, to which the professor replied that Lucio already guessed it herself. This is already clear, because before Oedipus was able to solve the riddle of this monster, he had already swallowed several people. Then Lucio asked the professor if he could solve such a riddle, to which he answered in the negative and added that even the dean could not solve it. Therefore, if suddenly the nymph has the misfortune of meeting the Sphinx, then it is better for her to run as fast as she can and not look back. Remembering the words of her professor, the nymph burst into tears. She remembered that he warned her, but now everything was definitely lost. They will never guess this riddle. But then, Hajun raised his hand, preparing to give an answer. He looked calm and confident. The answer from his mouth was, Quacko. The nymph's heart froze in the moment, as did she herself. Lucio initially couldn't even move when she heard this ridiculous answer. Having come to her senses, the nymph began to shout at Hajun, saying, "What is he allowing himself to do? How could he waste their only attempt so mediocrely?" Such an answer would not even have occurred to a complete imbecile. Lucio attacked the guy, saying that if he really wants to die quickly, then let him do it when she's not around. But then, a quiet smile escaped the Sphinx's lips. Silence froze around until the monster's voice said the cherished, "Right!" This greatly shocked the nymph. She couldn't believe that such an answer could be correct. But Ha-Jung grinned, saying that the Sphinx always has absurd riddles. Here the powerful voice of the Sphinx was heard again from above. Calling Ha-Jun an alien, He praised him for this solution and allowed him to move on. But Ha-jung was already boiling and rudely asked the Sphinx to shut up. The guy has already solved the stupid riddle. Let this monster leave him behind now. The Sphinx, of course, was shocked by such arrogant behavior of a person. Especially after Ha-jun, as he was leaving, shouted at him to come up with something smarter next time. Otherwise, this is some kind of kindergarten, not riddles. The Sphinx's eyes even began to water from surprise, and he sent the guy. But he did not give up and began to tease the monster, saying that he had really cried. Stuttering, the Sphinx answered in an offended voice that he just had sand in his eyes and nothing more. But Ha-jung had already left, continuing on his way. The quest with the Sphinx was successfully completed. While accelerating, Ha-jung told the nymph to hold on tight to him, as now they would gain a lot of speed. She agreed and followed the instructions. She thought to herself how this man could come up with such a strange answer. During this time, they entered the gorge. After checking the navigator, Ha-jung was convinced that they were driving correctly and were almost at their destination. All that remains is to cross this gorge, and they are there. Then Lucio turned to the man and said that she was asking for forgiveness for her words. After all, she was supposed to help the guy on the way, but all she did was condemn him for being that person. Lucio thought to herself that she didn't deserve to be called a mega elite. Ha-jun calmly listened to her and decided to calm her down. The guy said that Lucio had nothing to reproach himself for. Working as an ordinary courier, he had heard something different in his direction, so the nymph's words did not hurt him at all. Ha-jun told Lucio that he felt like he was on vacation and babysitting his younger cousin. Therefore, everything is in order and the nymph should not worry. Hearing such sweet words, Lucio became embarrassed and thanked Ha-jun, calling him by name for the first time. Having reached the pyramids, Ha-jun and Lucio looked at them with delight. The nymph did not even suspect that the pyramids were so huge. Ha-jun looked around and stared at the map. According to her, he should have been expected in this place. Then the voice of Lucio was heard, pointing to strange hieroglyphs on the slab, which clearly meant something. Lucio began to read them and did it out loud. On the stove, it said that if there was no guard, then you must ring the bell. Ha-jun was surprised that Lucio could read Egyptian hieroglyphs, but the nymph waved it off. It was natural for her. She is a mega elite. This really seemed cool to Ha-jun. But he decided to press the button in the center of the plates, which meant a call. As soon as the or did this, a bright blue light began to shine from below, and the ground beneath them began to shake, creating even more cracks from which blue rays fell. Ha-jun couldn't understand what was happening. In the moment, he was afraid. Lucio said that this is some kind of gravitational magic, but this did not change the fact that the ground beneath them continued to crack. Ha-jun didn't understand why right on the stove to ring the bell if something like this happens later. Then the ground beneath them finally collapsed, and the heroes began to fall down. The fall was long and created large clouds of dust. Rising up on his elbows, Ha-jun at first did not believe that he could survive such a fall. Then he heard strange wheezing underneath him. At first this alarmed him greatly. But then he remembered Lucio, who happened to be right under him. Ha-jun immediately began to get up and be indignant in an agitated voice, since Lucio didn't even give a hint when the guy pinned her down. Quickly rising, Ha-jun looked at the nymph, who was lying in the hole formed by the fall. The guy was already afraid that he had killed her. But Lucio responded to his questions and replied that she was alive. Having risen and come to their senses, the heroes continued their journey through the dungeon of the pyramid. Ha-jun walked with a flashlight from his phone. The nymph was flying nearby. Reflecting on what was happening, Ha-jun did not understand what awaited him next. All this looked more like completing some kind of quest in a dungeon, and not like delivery. Then Lucio's voice suddenly and sharply rang out. She called Ha-jun, but he asked the nymph in a tired voice what was wrong this time. Are there any traps in the floor? Flying up to the wall, Lucio asked the guy to point his shining piece of metal at the hieroglyphs written on this wall. Pointing the flashlight at the wall, Ha-jun tried to make out what was written there. It turned out that in front of him were real ancient frescoes. Taking a closer look, Ha-jun saw drawn people and, oddly enough, a giant. Lucio looked at this fresco with fear in her eyes. Apparently, there was really something creepy written there. Ha-jun asked the nymph what she saw there. Lucio began to tell her that she had once heard about a certain evil goddess who loved to kidnap and torture nymphs. These frescoes must have been created by Lucio's ancestors to tell of terrible crimes against their people. Staring at the murals, Ha-jun noted that he did not see any crimes in these pictures. And in general, everything that is drawn on them looks more like a holiday. Lucio was already aggressive and determined, speaking about the fact that you meet the enemy when you least expect him. Therefore, on this day, she will take revenge for the suffering of her ancestors. Here, Ha-jun immediately reacted, saying that there would be no revenge today. After all, whoever lives in this pyramid is, first of all, their client. Here, behind the heroes, a gentle and authoritative female voice was heard, and a bright golden light poured from there. The voice repeated after Lucio, asking about revenge in a curious voice. Is this why they snuck into the house of the goddess? Turning around, the nymph and the courier saw a beautiful and majestic sight. Having called the guys little rude people, the goddess looked at them with a calm and confident look, and a sly smile was visible on her face. The goddess asked again, which of her visitors wants revenge? Her gaze was too intent, but Ha-jung had difficulty seeing both the goddess's gaze and herself. Such a blinding light emanated from her that you couldn't even see who was talking. At that moment, Lucio made a loud noise, shouting that she would avenge her ancestors. She is level 2 and mega elite. The nymph accelerated and flew aggressively towards the goddess. Ha-jun tried to stop her. He was angry that this impulsive child immediately attacked without words or a showdown. Seeing the girl, the goddess was slightly surprised. She realized that she was a nymph, and her eyes lit up. Stretching out her hands to Lucio, she said that she had not seen anyone like her for a long time. But the nymph was already flying straight to the goddess. She grabbed the nymph and unexpectedly hugged her tightly, saying that all the nymphs were very cute. A happy smile appeared on the goddess's face. Lucio began to be indignant and ordered the goddess to let her go immediately, because she was the sworn enemy of her family. But the goddess continued to hug and squeeze the nymph, which surprised Ha-jun. The guy did not understand at all what was happening until the goddess began to tell the story. A long time ago, she invited nymphs to her place and organized various holidays and competitions for them. The young nymphs were incredibly cute, but unfortunately, they are no longer with the goddess. Ha-jun stood and tried to draw logical chains. He was horrified by the thought that all these nymphs could die from the strong embrace of the goddess. After all, she hugged and squeezed Lucio so much that she could easily strangle the little nymph in her arms. After releasing Lucio, the goddess said with delight that it was very difficult for her to stop herself when she saw something so cute. Ha-jun now understood what Lucio meant by torture. In tears, the nymph looked angrily at the goddess, saying that she almost killed her. A little more, and she would have been on a boat crossing the river Styx. Then Lucio turned to Ha-jun and asked why he didn't save her and even now didn't say anything to the goddess. Ha-jun reassured the nymph, saying that he warned her to learn to control herself. Lucio attacked the guy, shouting that since he considers her like a cousin, then why doesn't he protect her in any situation? Ha-jun tried to brush off the little thorn and make sure it didn't act up. Their verbal and even slightly physical skirmish was interrupted by the goddess. She decided to introduce herself, saying that she was the mistress of the two richest and sunniest countries, and also the high priestess of all the temples of Egypt, the divine incarnation of Horus, the all-powerful falcon. And her name is Pharaoh. The goddess introduced herself majestically and said her name, looking at her guests and waiting for the appropriate reaction. But they turned a deaf ear to her words and, having quarreled even more, they stood opposite each other and were going to fight one after another to finally decide who was right. Their behavior outraged the goddess, and she asked if they had heard anything. Ha-jun replied that he understood that her name was Pharaoh, but this seemed strange to him, since he thought that only the kings of Egypt were called that. Lucio called him ignorant and added that it would be better if he were silent altogether. But Pharaoh calmly replied that in this world there are two types of goddesses and gods. There are those like Cupid or Hephaestus. They were born gods, and there are those who have achieved divinity. Lucio whispered to herself that Pharaoh, it turns out, is already an old aunt. The goddess continued her story that divinity is achieved throughout life, such as this old aunt. Then Pharaoh added, turning to the little nymph, that it didn't seem very nice to call her old aunt. Lucio felt uneasy at being heard. Then Ha-jun turned to Pharaoh and, apologizing, said that they were only here because they were making deliveries. The goddess said that she was aware, since she had been watching them all this time with her magic crystal ball. Then something moved on Hajun's back. The guy was surprised and a little scared, but then his order packaging was torn. The cane flew straight out of the wrapper and flew towards Pharaoh. The goddess caught the green glowing cane and smiled. Having examined the artifact delivered to her, her look became as satisfied as possible. Pharaoh noticed that the work was excellent and the shape was perfect. The next moment, she thanked Hajun for the delivery. And later she added that the delivery man, Hajun Lee, fully lives up to his reputation in their world. These words surprised the guy. He missed the moment when he had his own reputation, but that doesn't matter. It only meant that he would be paid well. The guy immediately bowed, putting on his most friendly face, and said that he thanked the goddess for using Hajun Lee's delivery service, and that he asked for the payment and tip to be sent to his account. Strike while the iron is hot, as they say. But looking at this spectacle, the nymph told the guy that he was disgusting. She didn't understand why he behaved like a greedy trader in the market. Turning to Hajun, she asked where his self-respect had gone. To which the guy replied that self-respect cannot be spread on bread. And by the way, with this very money that he earns, the guy bought the nymph the sweets she liked so much. When Lucio heard about the candy, his mouth immediately began to water. The nymph immediately stood next to Hajung and, also bowing absurdly, said the same phrase that Hajung had said. "Thank you for using Hajung Lee's delivery service, old..." "Oh, I mean madam." The guy grinned at how a little bit of capitalism had changed the nymph's behavior so much. Pharaoh added that she was pleased to see that the guy was friends with this cute little people of nymphs and told him not to worry about payment. She is a generous goddess. Pharaoh snapped her fingers and the payment was immediately credited to the guy's account. A notification appeared on the screen that the delivery was completed and 5,000 points were awarded for it, and the tip from Pharaoh amounted to another 5,000 points. The amount on the account was 195,300 points, a total of 19,530,000,000 won. While Hajun stared at the screen in shock and tried to digest the information, Lucio said that since she helped, then the guy had a lot of candy. To celebrate, Hajung said that he would buy Lucio the entire sweet store. Or maybe even open a whole confectionery factory. Delighted, Lucio said that in this case she would receive 90% of the income from the factory. Hajun grinned at the nymph's desire, as did the goddess, who called the nymph a little predator. Pharaoh also said that now, when it is time for guests to leave, they can leave through the main entrance, rather than through this tunnel. Hajun cast a questioning glance at the goddess. The goddess also noted that, although she was nostalgic about going down into the dungeon, she was somehow tired of receiving couriers in the basement. Surprised, Hajun said that he thought that this entrance through which they entered was the main one. Nympha added that they even saw a bell at the entrance, and it says that if there is no security, then you need to ring it. The pharaoh grinned and said that there had been no guards there for several centuries, and now they could just leave through the main entrance. Hajun was a little shocked, and Lucio hesitated, realizing that the place they entered through was not the front door. The nymph felt embarrassed. Hajun angrily shouted that the nymph would not receive any candy for this. In response, Lucio screamed and called the guy evil. Delivery to the pyramid has been completed, and now you can return to Hephaestus again. The journey was long, but they finally got there. Having reached the monastery of Hephaestus, Hajung once again thought that he could die. But in any case, everything worked out, and he began to wake up the nymph who had fallen asleep on his moped. At that moment, her saliva dripped onto the guy's hand. It was funny and unpleasant at the same time. Rubbing her eyes, Lucius realized that they had already returned. Hajun took her hand and said that naturally they had already arrived. It was already dark outside. But Lucio followed him with sleepy eyes closed. Then the guy told her again that they were already in Hephaestus's forge. Opening her eyes, the nymph turned to Hajun and thanked him for this adventure. She was having a lot of fun. Hajun was surprised by the good nature of the nymph, but then remembered that, since they had completed the delivery, it was time for them to say goodbye. Then he replied to Lucio that he also had fun with her, even though she talked a lot. Then the nymph exclaimed, asking why Hajung said this because he ruined such a touching moment. But the guy replied that he had told the absolute truth, because the nymph herself would not deny that she was a little talker. It seems that the guys even got attached to each other. But Lucio said she would never work with the guy again. It was a mutual desire. Hajun hoped so too. The guy did not expect that he and the nymph would become friends. Having met Hephaestus, he began to praise them, saying that the client had nothing but enthusiastic words about them. Then Hephaestus said that it would be nice if these two always worked in pairs, but he saw surprised looks from the nymph and the courier. Smirking and looking at each other, Lucio and Hajun decided to refuse this offer. The nymph did not want to work with this little man anymore, just as Hajun did not want to work with the small nymph. Their views simultaneously became slightly aggressive, and they almost simultaneously answered Hephaestus, "This will not happen again." The nymph added that it was better to die than to work with this boor. This is such a conflict of interest. Early the next morning, someone called out to Hajun. The guy had to open his eyes. The little nymph tried to push Hajun away and wake him up. Seeing Lucio, the guy was scared at first. Rising sharply from the bed, he, looking at the nymph, shouted how she got here. Lucio covered her ears with her hands at the sharp sound and asked not to shout at her. And then she added that she and Hajun are now partners. Has the guy forgotten everything? Hajun really forgot that he couldn't refuse Hephaestus. God was very upset when Hajun refused to cooperate with Lucio and began to press for pity because he never asked the guy for a favor and all for the sake of this. Therefore, Hajun had to team up with this child. He would have to get used to her presence. The guy asked the nymph why she woke him up, even though he was sleeping soundly and sweetly. The nymph replied that the noise from Hajun's phone did not stop. The guy was surprised and decided to check the notifications. Looking at the screen, Hajun was shocked by the number of orders. There were more than 4 of them. This couldn't happen. Taking a closer look, the guy noticed that these were the most ordinary orders, received not from the gods but from ordinary people. Ha-jung realized that he was worried in vain. Come to think of it, it's already been a week since he was removed from regular orders. Noticing the thoughtful expression on the guy's face, Lucio asked if everything was okay. Hajun told her not to worry, but Lucio wanted to know what was wrong and started whining, which was the last thing the guy wanted. He asked her to leave. Then Hajun's phone vibrated. He pulled away from the nymph, saying that someone was calling him, and looked at the display. Seeing the inscription "manager" on it, Hajun was surprised. He didn't know how or what he should answer. In the end, he decided to say that he wanted to quit and picked up the phone. Before Hajun had time to put the phone to his ear, the manager's scream was heard from the speaker, indignant. Why didn't the guy take orders? Didn't he notice that he was back at work? Hajun tried to respond, but the manager kept yelling about how they had too many deliveries in the queue and needed to be completed. Arrogant delivery department manager Dalman B.A. was 39 years old. One of the distinguishing features was baldness. He added to his monologue that the guy should be grateful to him for not firing him, and Hajun was lucky that he wasn't suspended for long. But apparently the guy didn't learn his lesson. Therefore, let him start work now, otherwise he will be fired. After listening to all this, Hajun exploded with anger and told the manager to fire him quickly. The manager did not expect such a reaction and asked the guy if he was in his right mind. Hajun continued to respond by yelling at the manager and saying that even if he was crazy, it wouldn't change anything. Let him be fired now. Looking at Hajun, Lucio was surprised by his behavior. His energy level reached 40,000. This is too weird for Hajun. The manager continues to threaten Hajun, saying that he is sure that he can find another job. After all, if he puts the guy on the blacklist, then, in his opinion, he's screwed. Hajun replied that he was tired of the threats. It's no wonder that the manager's bald head is already losing hair. The guy then added that he was tired of everything, so let them do what they want, and said goodbye, hanging up. The manager was shocked and desperate. He was hurt by the words about his hair, although he didn't understand what it had to do with it. For him, it was a blow below the belt. After this conversation, Lucio asked Hajun if he was okay. The guy just grinned. He replied that everything was fine and it was time to go get some food. It is necessary to celebrate a new life without arrogant bosses and freedom. At this time, in the Yongwon Guild, leader Park Sung-joon heard a report on the work performed by his subordinates, which concerned the search for the mysterious courier. The leader was informed that he could not be found yesterday. Song-jung was surprised and unhappy. The guild captain of the 3rd squad of the Yongwon Guild, Jang Soo-ho, made an excuse by saying that they searched every corner, but did not notice any trace of him. The hunter also suggested that since his moped is so difficult to track, perhaps the courier knows that they are looking for him and is hiding. He could also change his ID number. Sung Jung wearily thanked the hunter for his work, even if it did not bring results. The leader already had a lot of problems, and now this guy has to deal with it. Jang Suho asked the leader if they should continue the search, to which Sung Jun answered in the negative, since they cannot simply waste their strength. Then the leader clarified what news there was from Busan. Jang Suho replied that things were not going well. The hunter explained that the squad of 6 A ranks sent on the raid had retreated. It looks like in about 5 days the portal will turn into a full-fledged dungeon. The leader nodded thoughtfully, making it clear that he understood the situation. He thought about this situation. A month ago, a portal appeared on Hyundai Beach. When the association contacted him, Sung Jun immediately realized that clearing the dungeon would not be so easy. But the leader did not think that 6 A ranks would not be enough, but he was not worried, but had already thought of what could be done. Sung Jung ordered Chan Suho to tell Irene and the first squad to begin preparing to leave. This order surprised the hunter. Jang Suho realized that the leader wanted to go to Busan himself. Sung Jung was ready to show everyone again why Yongwon is considered the best guild in the country. He was very eager to go to Busan and deal with this portal. It's been a while since the leader went on business trips. It's time to resume them. At this time, Ha-jun, having tasted the dish he ordered, rejoiced at its taste. He just wanted something spicy, and the food fully met his expectations. The guy was thinking that he would like to see the manager's face when the guy said that he was quitting. It was epic in his head. Opposite Ha-jun, Lucio sat and devoured noodles on both cheeks, saying that she had never tasted such deliciousness. The guy told her to eat slowly because she might get all her clothes dirty, but Lucio didn't care. She couldn't even imagine that there were so many delicious things in the world, and she devoured them faster and faster. Looking at her, Ha-jun smiled. He had a funny feeling that Lucio had lived her life in vain without trying food, but it's just a plate of noodles. Conversations could be heard from the side of the small group. People who looked at Lucio's reaction to ordinary bean noodles began to think that they were having a hard time if she was trying such an ordinary dish for the first time. Further, these people began to speculate that Ha-jun was most likely a single father, since the girl eats noodles with such an appetite. The guy was surprised by their reaction. A little later, after finishing the noodles, Lucio clutched her stomach as if she was ready to explode from the amount of food in it. Ha-jun, wiping her mouth with a napkin, carefully said that he warned her not to eat so much. Then he suddenly came to his senses and realized what it all looked like from the outside. And now it really seems to him that he has a daughter. People were talking behind them again? Was this the guy who lives next to them? But this building only has tiny apartments, which are definitely not suitable for raising a child. Ha-jun suddenly thought with annoyance that everyone in the area thought he was a slacker. But since now he will have to live with the nymph, he should find a larger apartment. At that same moment, Ha-jung asked the nymph, and even rather himself, if it was time for them to move. Lucio was interested in this idea. Ha-jun asked the nymph the reason for her excitement. Lucio replied that anyone would be happy to move from some shallow puddle. The guy was outraged that the nymph expressed herself as if she had lived there all her life. Then Lucio turned, pointed at a huge building, calling it a palace, and suggested moving there. Looking after Lucio, the guy stared in surprise at the huge and obviously expensive residential complex. He was surprised by Lucio's ambitions. Grabbing her cheeks, he became indignant, asking sarcastically if she knew how much apartments cost now. Especially there. Definitely no less than 20 billion won. Then the nymph asked where all the money that she helped get in the pyramid went to. And then it dawned on Ha-jun. Having opened the balance and seeing 195,300 coins on it, he realized that he could afford it. Perhaps an apartment is a really good investment. Lucio's eyes lit up at this news, and they went to look at possible apartment options. Entering the first apartment that was offered to them by the realtor hired by Ha-jun, the nymph was surprised at how spacious it was and already imagined how they would live in it. But Ha-jun was in no hurry to make a choice. The building is new, so all the apartments in it will be luxurious. Then the guy turned to a realtor. He asked him to repeat it one more time. The realtor said the current owners will be able to move out in 2 weeks, and the rent for the apartment is 200,001 per month. Then the realtor went wild and began to further describe the apartment, saying that better conditions are difficult to find since the location of the building is simply gorgeous. It is not too high. Schools and transport are nearby, and the owner will not regret the purchase even after 20 years. Then Ha-jung interrupted the man and said that although the apartment was really cool, he would like to look at other places, since buying the first place is not very smart. The man said that he would show everything that was available. Ha-jun called Lucio. They left the apartment and went to look at the new place. Lucio was upset that they would not live here, but Ha-jun replied that he had not decided yet. While the nymph was capricious, the guy felt a gaze on him. Turning around, he saw a girl. It was a girl from the Yongwon Guild, Irene. And although the guy didn't know her name, he recognized her by her face and understood who she was. Ha-jun walked on without stopping. After some time, Lucio ate another portion of noodles and went crazy with pleasure. But then she noticed Ha-jun's thoughtful face and asked why he wasn't eating. The guy looked worried. Ha-jun took pleasure in the knowledge that he bought a home on the very first day of his search. This is, of course, insanely cool. After a whole day of searching for an apartment, the guy finally settled on the building that he saw first thanks to Lucio and bought a home in it. He also bought an apartment at a price much lower than the market price, but he still had reason to worry, namely the girl he saw the day before. Ha-jun was sure that he saw her among the hunters in the dungeon. The helmet covered half of his face, so there was a good chance the huntress didn't recognize him. But still, the guy was also worried that he was not receiving new orders. Lucio asked the guy if they didn't finish one recently. Ha-jun replied that nothing new had arrived in 2 days. It's not much, but he used to receive orders every day. Hearing this, Lucio said loudly and in surprise that this was even too often. She thought that orders should arrive much less frequently. She also instructively added that excessive greed does no good to anyone. Ha-jun already has enough money from his last deliveries. With despondency in his voice, the guy replied that there were enough of them until yesterday. Now he doesn't have much on his balance sheet. In total, he had more than 19 billion won. But after all the expenses after buying an apartment, for which the guy paid 17 billion, the amount in his account decreased. In addition to everything, the guy needs to buy new furniture and household appliances, as well as pay a realtor. Ha-jun began to count diligently. The results did not console him. He realized with annoyance that all the money had gone to housing. Lucio was shocked by his words. The mistake a new tenant makes is overestimating their finances. Lucio screamed in horror, asking why housing was so expensive. With that money, Ha-jun could buy an entire castle in the divine world. Ha-jun couldn't know that. He just said that living in Seoul has always been expensive. Nothing can be done about it. Then the nymph asked what they should do now. Ha-jun, mockingly and regretfully, said that they would no longer be able to buy candy for the nymph. Her indignation immediately showed that she was against this idea. Lucio was ready to come up with anything to get money for candy. Now she understood what was happening. Then the nymph came up with an idea and invited the guy to become a promoter. Ha-jun didn't like this idea. He didn't want to become a door beggar. Then the nymph said that they did not have to wait for a new order. They could immediately go to Hephaestus and ask if he knew any gods or heroes who would need delivery. This idea seemed brilliant to the guy. He hugged Lucio, calling her smart and maybe even a genius, and began to squeeze her with joy. But then Ha-jun asked the nymph how they could get to Olympus. The disheveled Lucio replied that there was nothing complicated about it and that everything should be done as usual. Ha-jun was surprised, because he usually teleports to Olympus when he receives a notification about the order. The nymph was surprised at this answer. A tense silence hung in the room. Meanwhile, the first and second squads of the Yongwon Guild, consisting of 45 hunters, lined up near the operating helicopter. The guild leader, Park Sung-jun, and his deputy Irene Baek approached them. Everyone's faces were serious. The guild leader appeared before the hunters and decided to give a motivational speech. He was sure that the hunters already knew that today they were all going to Haeundae Beach in order to deal with the new portal. The leader added that he wanted his comrades to forget their previous failures and bring glory to the guild again. The squad members let out loud cheers, signaling that they were ready to take on a difficult mission. Then, looking at Irene and seeing the readiness to go in her eyes, Sung-jun called out to her and told her to come with him. The hunters quickly found themselves in a helicopter, which immediately began to rise, beginning their journey. Already sitting on board the aircraft, Ha-jun asked Irene about the courier, since she had previously told the leader that this mysterious guy was her new neighbor. Irene replied that she could not find out whether he had already moved into the new apartment, but he had obviously visited it. Ha-jun was shocked. He thought about how they couldn't find the guy after searching every corner of the city, and he was right under Irene's nose. It also took so much time and money. Then the leader clarified whether Irene really saw him. The girl confidently confirmed these words. Now it won't be difficult to find a guy. Now they need to focus on the portal. But the thought that this guy had defeated the dungeon boss did not leave Irene. Staring out the window, she hoped that one day she would be able to catch him in battle. The guy interested her very much. At this time, Ha-jun had already moved to the world of the gods and entered the abode of Hephaestus, loudly greeting him. But no one responded. Then the guy assumed that Hephaestus was not working today, since even the light in his forge was not on. The little nymph told the guy in a frightened voice that they had better leave here. They may receive divine punishment for passing without permission. Ha-jun was surprised. There was nowhere to retreat. They've already arrived, and in general, Lucio herself invited him to come here. Then the nymph shouted in despair that their actions were still terribly disrespectful. This cannot be done towards the gods. Ha-jung immediately noticed that this was not something to talk about to the little girl who called Pharaoh an old woman, but who was forgiven for being so cute. Then the loud and dissatisfied voice of Hephaestus was heard from behind, who was indignant that someone dared to come to him so early. But seeing the guy with the nymph, God softened, immediately recognizing them. He was interested in why they came to him. God didn't order the delivery, then what's the matter? What brought the courier here? Ha-jun awkwardly scratched the back of his head and replied that he had one request. Saying this, the guy made the most friendly face possible. Seeing Hephaestus's displeasure and bewilderment, Ha-jung immediately said that it would be impolite to come to God empty-handed. While the guy was rummaging through the bag, Hephaestus was already looking forward to the gift. The first thought that popped into his head turned out to be correct. The guy took out a small bottle of soju from his bag. He remembered how much God liked beer, so he decided to bring something stronger to try. Taking the bottle, the satisfied Hephaestus was already in a positive mood and asked what the guy needed from him. After hesitating, Ha-jun replied that he wanted to ask if Hephaestus could introduce him to gods or goddesses who might be interested in his delivery. Thinking, Hephaestus replied that he had someone in mind. But there is one caveat, it might be too dangerous. But Ha-jun was determined and replied that he was ready to take on any opportunity. The guy thought to himself that there is nothing more dangerous than poverty. Hephaestus said thoughtfully that if the guy really thinks he can handle everything, then fine. Then you'll have to teleport him. Blue light began to pour from Hephaestus's hand, enveloping the guy. He exclaimed in surprise. Ha-jun tried to ask for details about the order, but didn't have time. The teleport took him from the house of God. Opening his eyes and looking around, the guy didn't understand where he was. There is a continuous forest around, grass, trees, and greenery. The frightened guy was indignant that God had thrown him out somewhere without even giving any explanation. What does he expect from the courier then? Then, Ha-jun's suit sent a notification that danger was nearby. This meant that something terrible was heading towards the guy. Turning his head, Ha-jun saw a monster rushing towards him, like a boar with 3 red, creepy eyes. The guy didn't understand what it was. Ha-jung began to realize that he would not have time to dodge, and covered himself with his hands in fear. Then a bright green arrow flew at the huge monster, and he fell dead right in front of the guy. He did not have time to understand what happened and what it was. Looking back in fear, he saw an immobilized animal. The monster apparently was already dead. Then a strange rustling was heard from the bushes. Something small was approaching the guy. Lucio jumped out of the grass and exclaimed joyfully that she barely managed to get to the guy before he was turned into a human cake. Ha-jun was surprised by the appearance of the nymph. He didn't know that she would follow him. Lucio said that after Ha-jun disappeared, she was immediately sent after him. The guy sarcastically thanked the nymph for just standing and watching him suffer here and not even helping. But Lucio happily replied that it was an interesting sight. After all, monsters like the boars of Olympus are known for their ferocity, and Ha-jun killed him with one blow. Then the guy realized that it was not he who killed the monster. Then the real killer came out of the bushes. He was surprised that there were people in this place. Footsteps of hooves were heard from the side. Having completely emerged from cover, a real centaur stood before the man and the nymph. The man had the top of a man and the bottom of a horse. The guy was surprised. What kind of strange horseman is this? This creature looked intently at the guy and the nymph, clearly not expecting to see such a union. Hajun also stared at him. Then, in the silence, the sound of a notification was heard, which said that the courier had arrived at its destination. This meant that this strange man was Hajun's client. The situation became more and more interesting. The centaur said that strangers rarely come here. Maybe they could at least introduce themselves to him? Lucio immediately noticed that the centaur was lame. His front left leg was taped. Pulling Hajun's hand, the nymph said that she seemed to know who was standing in front of them. In the world of the gods, there were many strongest warriors. One of them is Jason, the leader of the Argonauts. The second, Achilles, the hero of the Trojan War, is also the strongest warrior in history, and another greatest warrior who during the Gigantomachy led the Olympian gods to victory. It was the great Hercules. And in front of them now is Chiron, the mentor of all these great heroes. This information was impressive. But then Chiron became wary, gathered strength in his hands, and was deeply indignant that the name of Hercules was uttered in his presence. The centaur apparently had a strong grudge against him. Having created a magic bow, he ran at the guy with the words, they say, "Does he even know what he went through because of this idiot Hercules?" Hajung tried to explain that he was generally silent, and in general they were sent by Hephaestus, and they came with a delivery, and not at all to cause trouble for Chiron. The centaur paused for a second, pondering the information. Hearing the name Hephaestus was unexpected for him. Chiron thought he was being played for a fool and continued his attack. Ha-Jun began to dodge and prove that he was not lying. After some time, the guy still managed to get through to the centaur, and he took him and Lucio to his hut. There, Ha-Jun told the whole story from beginning to end. The nymph sat and nodded, agreeing with her partner. They have proven that they are not dangerous, the centaur thought, since Hephaestus does not talk about him and does not even mention his name in the presence of just anyone. Looking at Ha-Jun, whose legs were already hurting from sitting on his knees, one could not say that he was a hero, but friendship with a nymph can say a lot. Even the most famous heroes can hardly boast of such partners or friends as nymphs. Moreover, they should be their travel companions. While the centaur was thinking, Ha-Jun asked Lucio why this horseman was so suspicious. They've already explained everything. Why shouldn't he believe them? The nymph did not know the answer, but said that they say that Chiron has a vulnerable soul. After a long pause and reflection, the centaur decided to trust the small company and their good intentions. Hearing this, the guy and the nymph were very happy, and Lucio even called him one of the wisest creatures since he made such a conclusion. Chiron asked them if they really could get everything he asked for. Ha-Jung, awkwardly scratching the back of his head, replied that not everything, but a lot. The centaur thought to himself that the guy needed to be tested. Holding a can in his hand, he told his partners to go into the forest and go north. There they will find a giant cave. Having given the jar to the guy, the centaur asked him to find in this cave and collect the saliva of the lazy bumpkin who was sleeping in it. Hearing the request, Ha-Jun froze in bewilderment. Does Chiron really want him to collect some saliva and bring it to him in a jar? Then the guy decided to clarify, saying that he hoped that the saliva did not need to literally come from this person's mouth. Chiron replied that this is exactly what needs to be done. Then he asked if the guy had any objections. Ha-Jun thought that this was essentially an unthinkable violation of another person's personal space. But for him, this is not a reason to refuse the order. And a second later, he was already dragging Lucio along with him, setting off and shouting that let Chiron think that he already has the saliva. He will deal with everything quickly. The centaur just looked after him and grinned, calling him a pathetic little man. After all, he didn't even bother to ask what dangers awaited him along this path. This is a simple test that will show whether he can be trusted. Even if the guy comes out of the huge forest alive, a terribly difficult obstacle awaits him further. Rocky snow-capped mountains that you have to cross. And not a single person is capable of this. If the guy turns out to be an empty talker, then just one look at these mountains will make him give up. But then something happened that Chiron definitely did not expect. The guy's suit lit up, and he himself flew into the air at great speed, taking the nymph with him. For the centaur, seeing this was as unexpected as possible, because he thought that Ha-Jun was a simple guy. But this guy used his racing suit to make a super jump. However, this could be done once, and the effect of the skill lasts only a minute. Ha-jun was already quite used to this suit and handled it well. With the speed he has gained, he and the nymph will quickly reach the cave. Jumping over the rocks like a jumper, the guy quickly climbed up and also quickly moved forward. A couple of moments later, he and Lucio were already standing at the entrance to the ominous cave. A notification has arrived that the destination has been reached. The racer's suit switched off at the same moment. He needed time to reboot. This was annoying for the guy, since he used the suit's functionality too mercilessly. Staggering, Lucio said she felt dizzy. Ha-jun inquired about her well-being, but the nymph quickly recovered and they entered the cave. Since they are here, we need to get some saliva. Lucio wanted to do this as quickly as possible. Descending deeper and shining a flashlight in front of him, Ha-jun realized that he had not yet seen anyone sleeping. Then a small stone broke off on the side of the cave wall. Lucio shuddered. The guy mockingly asked if she was chickening out. The nymph answered him that fear is not characteristic of mega elites, but Lucio herself was literally shaking from what was happening. Here, looking forward, Lucio screamed very loudly. Ha-jun asked not to shout so suddenly as she would confuse him. Why was she even afraid? It's just a couple of drops from the ceiling. But then Ha-jun turned in the direction in which the nymph was looking and was horrified. A huge snakehead appeared before him. And behind her there was more and more. Huge snakes were everywhere. Apparently out of fear, Ha-jun's brain turned off for a second, and the first thing he thought was that there definitely shouldn't be any problems with saliva, and he smiled like a madman. At this time, Chiron was limping and looking for Ha-jun. He didn't understand where the boy had gone. The centaur thought that he was an ordinary person. And I didn't know that he had hidden abilities, and yet he is only human. Even with his abilities, he cannot climb the mountain. The centaur himself was very tired by the time he got to this point. But when he reached the cave, he realized that the guy had really gone down there. This seemed impossible to Chiron. He became angry, and his power began to pour out. But it was difficult to do this fully. The centaur's wounded leg was very painful. A sharp pain pierced the joint. But that didn't stop him from using his strength and speeding up. Chiron understood that the guy should not go into the cave, because there are immortal monsters there. He urgently needs to be stopped. But Ha-jun had already reached the monsters and, looking at them, realized that now he could be finished. A second later, he abruptly began to run back from the terrible monster, taking the nymph with him. Hiding behind a stone and catching his breath, Ha-jun assumed that these monsters were now sleeping. Lucio couldn't believe what she saw. It seemed impossible. The huge snake with several heads was terrifying. Then it dawned on Lucio, and she blurted out loudly that this was a huge monster, a hydra. Ha-jun was surprised. The nymph indignantly asked how Chiron could trust him with this. But the guy couldn't answer. Who could have known that we would have to get the saliva of this particular monster? Looking out from the shelter, Ha-jun thought that he could still do something with the helmet, but Hephaestus teleported them so unexpectedly that he had to go without him. Then Ha-jun received a notification. It said that in an emergency, you can use the warp service. It said that for just 5,000 coins, the service will transfer previously purchased goods to where the person who makes the request is now located. Ha-jun got angry when he saw the price. 50 million won just for moving goods seemed like a robbery. The Hades helmet even cost less, although now is not the time to choose. The order needs to be completed. So Ha-jun pressed the button and teleported his helmet into his hands. There are 188,700 points left on your balance. The nymph exclaimed that a helmet had just fallen from the sky. The guy sadly replied that this was his hard-earned 50 million. Putting on the invisibility helmet, Ha-jun headed straight towards the Hydra. Lucio tried to stop him and said that the exit was in the other direction. But Ha-jun already knew this, but was ready to go and carry out tasks. Lucio told him he was crazy. This is a real Hydra. This huge monster is the daughter of Typhon, and even the gods of Olympus are afraid of its deadly poison. Looking at the Hydra, the guy thought how this monster could be someone's daughter. And why is it so scary? He sarcastically replied to Lucio that it seemed that this Typhon had scattered his seed everywhere since he had such a daughter. But the nymph had no time for jokes. She said that this time everything is different and even scarier than with the Sphinx. But Ha-jun replied that he could handle it and told her to go to the exit. Having resisted, the nymph called the guy crazy and, like a bullet, rushed to the exit. In parting, she shouted a wish that the deadly poison would melt him to the bone. Hearing this, Ha-jun was not particularly surprised. The nymph could leave gracefully, but in the end, she left only curses. Quite in the spirit of Luceo. Well, now it was time to start delivering. Ha-jun stared defiantly at the Hydra and walked forward. The Hydra seemed to be sleeping with its eyes open. He thought to himself that she might as well sleep normally. Otherwise, this look was very frightening. Ha-jun opened the jar and began to collect saliva from the mouth of the snakehead with disgust on his face. Honestly, it's an unpleasant procedure. He thought that it would be better not to touch the saliva, as it gave the impression that something terrible might happen. Ha-jun kept wondering why anyone would need this saliva. But having collected, as it seemed to him, enough, the guy was already closing the jar. He thought to himself that if only Chiron would try to give him a small tip for such a delivery. Suddenly, the ground beneath Ha-jun's feet began to shake. The guy couldn't understand what was happening. It was like an earthquake. Stones began to fall from the ceiling. Trying to stay on his feet, the guy dropped the can, breaking it. All the saliva was lost and spread across the floor. Again, in order to maintain balance, Ha-jun leaned his hand on the Hydra's eye, thinking that without a jar, he would not be able to collect the saliva. And only a moment later, the guy realized that with his touch and the sound of breaking glass, he had awakened the Hydra. He was very scared. But then I remembered that he was wearing a helmet. This means the monster doesn't see him, and you just need to not show that the guy is nearby. Covering his mouth with his hand and not moving, the guy thought that the trouble was over. But then he heard a voice asking him who he was. The voice went on to say that it could smell the skinned ghosts of hell. And then he suggested that someone who is here was sent from the abyss. Ha-jun realized with fear that the Hydra had smelled him and now knew that he was nearby. The voice said that there was no need to be so afraid. And then he asked about the helmet that hid the guy, asking if it really belonged to Hades. Ha-jun realized that the Hydra could see right through him. She, in turn, asked why he came to her. He also traveled such a long and difficult path and even swam across the river Styx. Ha-jun thought to himself that to answer the Hydra that he came for her saliva would be somehow impolite and ugly. Moreover, if he says so, the monster will most likely kill him. While the guy was thinking, the heads of the snakes were talking to each other, asking whether it was really possible to swim across the river Styx. The second head said that Hades sent him, so he did not swim across anything. The heads began calling names and arguing among themselves. Ha-jun was even a little confused at that moment. But not for long. The voice asked the guy why he was silent. He also added that he hoped that the courier woke him up, not because of some nonsense. If this were so, then the guy would have been in trouble, but Ha-jun found something to answer. Taking off his helmet, he said that he had come to convey greetings from the abyss. The guy himself realized that he was in a dead end. The voice in response sounded surprised. The owner of the voice guessed and assumed that it was Chiron who sent the guy. Ha-jun, shutting up in fear, replied that this was indeed so because lately Chiron had been unable to contact her. That's why he asked to say hello. The owner of the voice responded in surprise that although she had lived for several thousand years, this was the first time she had seen such a thing. The one who had been talking to the guy all this time finally came out of the shadows. The beautiful girl said that she was surprised that her brother was interested in her condition and asked what he would like as a guard. At this time, the nymph had already flown out of the cave and, terribly worried about Ha-jun, flew with all possible speed for help. She understood that even Ha-jun could not cope with the Hydra. What he did was pure suicide. Flying forward, she noticed a familiar figure moving towards her. It was Chiron who asked what happened and why was the nymph alone. Seeing the centaur, Lucio quickly began to talk about how the guy went alone to the Hydra and decided to fulfill the order. With regret, Chiron realized that Ha-jun had already reached the Hydra, and he could not stop the guy in time. Lucio began to insist that Ha-jun needed help, to which Chiron replied that even he, a demigod, would not be able to cope with the Hydra. This phrase made the nymph's blood freeze in her veins. She didn't know what to do now. The centaur also already regretted sending the guy to this job, but there was nothing left to do, and using his power, he told Lucio to show him the way to the cave. The centaur was very serious. He couldn't let the young guy die because of him. At this time, the elder sister of Cerberus, who was essentially a Hydra in human form, spoke to Ha-jun while standing around her snakes. The guy was surprised how pretty she was. The girl felt this and told him that after she was sealed in this place, she could no longer return to her true form. Even her brother has never seen the girl like this, so he doesn't know what she looks like now. Only now did the guy realize that Hydra's older brother is Cerberus. This realization made the guy think about their genealogy. Hydra confirmed the guy's assumptions and asked again how her older brother was doing. She couldn't contact him, so she was very worried. Ha-jung decided to embellish and said that in short, Cerberus now eats 3 times a day, and he gets paid. He is very pleased with his profession, but only as a pet for Hades. This is what the guy thought to himself. Ha-jun very cleverly twisted the situation, but the Hydra was satisfied with the answer. She chuckled and said she was very glad to hear that. But she didn't know that Ha-jun lied a little, and then Ha-jung said that since he had already said hello, it was time for him to go. And I thought to myself, if he stays here a little longer, he will definitely be caught lying. But the Hydra asked him to stop and said that since the guy came at the request of her brother, she couldn't just let him go. What will happen to her reputation then? The Hydra made the guy freeze in place with its sheer force. He could not move and, in a frightened voice, tried to understand what kind of reputation the Hydra had there. Hydra asked Ha-jun not to refuse her offer, and turning her back to the guy, told him to take the scales from her back. But not just any one, but precisely the one that glowed brightly in the very center of the scaly pattern. It was different in color, and the Hydra allowed the guy to pull it out of itself and take it with him. The situation seemed strange to Ha-jun. Why does the Hydra ask him to rip the scales off its back? But the girl insisted and asked the guy not to be afraid. Hydra said that her scales contain a dangerous power that could be useful to Ha-jun. After thinking, the guy suggested that her scales were some kind of object, like Son Goku's tail? Then, Ha-jun has no reason to refuse. Then Ha-jung approached the Hydra from behind and already stretched out his hands to the girl's back, where the scales were sticking out. But when he tried to pull it out, the guy couldn't do it, no matter how hard he pulled on the scale. The thought arose in the guy's head that the Hydra did this on purpose. Then Ha-jun decided to activate another function of his suit. He activated the riding suit, and the scales began to give in and out of the Hydra's skin. In the end, with one last push, the guy managed to get the scales. Out of joy, he shouted to the Hydra that he had succeeded. Then she grinned and asked the guy if he was too greedy. And she also said that she could not even think that the guy also had his eye on the girl herself. Hydra told the guy to do as he wanted and attractively lay down on the floor in front of him. Ha-jung was in a misunderstanding and didn't know what to do now. But the sound of hooves was already heard from behind, and then the voice of Chiron was heard, who said that he could not believe that the guy alone defeated the Hydra itself. Thinking, the guy felt ashamed. He imagined how this ridiculous situation looked from the outside and even got a little angry. Then Lucio's voice came from Chiron's shoulder. As soon as she saw the guy, she immediately flew towards him. Having flown closer, she hugged the guy and was happy, saying that she was glad that he was alive. Ha-jun was surprised by the nymph's presence. He said that it was dangerous here and asked her to wait outside. Moreover, she herself was shaking very much with fear while in the dungeon. But the nymph replied that Ha-jung did not listen to her either. It turns out that they really care about each other. Out of joy, the guy even began to squeeze the nymph, even though she doesn't like that. Chiron, all this time, was trying to come to his senses and realize the fact that an ordinary person managed to defeat the Hydra, although even Hercules found it difficult to cope with it. Did Hephaestus send him a real monster? The centaur's assumptions were one worse than the other, although the guy looked as harmless as possible. Turning around, the guy looked at the laughing Hydra and apologized to her for being too noisy. Hydra did not see a problem in this and only asked if this was his nymph. Ha! June did not understand the question and replied that she did not belong to him, but was simply a baby from a neighboring house. The nymph tried to object and show her importance, but Ha-jun continued to hold her, not letting her talk much. The story about the little girl from the neighboring house touched the Hydra, and she smiled again. But then her gaze squinted in the other direction. She saw Chiron and told him that they had not seen each other for a long time and he had aged. It's amazing that time doesn't spare even immortals, although it's hardly a matter of time. It's all about the Hydra poison, which has been in the centaur's leg for a long time. Seeing the clash between the Hydra and the centaur, Ha-jun asked what happened between them. Nymph called this question ignorance, since everyone knows this story. It all started with Hercules and an arrow poisoned by Hydra poison, and it ended with the death of Chiron. It was an accident. During the battle, a poisonous arrow hit the centaur in the leg. Chiron believed that this was his retribution for raising a real monster that he himself could not defeat. After a while, arriving at the abode of Zeus, the sage Chiron knelt before him and asked for a favor. The centaur asked Zeus to take away from him the immortality that God had given him. Zeus thought about these words because if he fulfills the request, Chiron will die from poison. But the centaur begged to do this because he could no longer endure this torment. Looking at Chiron, Zeus said that he could not allow Chiron to die. Considering that he raised so many heroes, Zeus decided to give him a constellation. At first, the centaur did not understand what was happening, but God, having already directed his energy at him, said that Chiron could not die. Then, he will understand why God did this. Chiron tried to resist, but nothing happened. Thus ended his life as a sage, and the centaur became a deity. Now he ruled the constellation Sagittarius. The centaur became the constellation Chiron, and did not die from the poison of the Hydra, which kills all living things. After listening to Chiron's short story, the Hydra clarified with him that the centaur, infected with this poison, was able to get to this place himself. And then, grinning, she added that most likely Chiron now lives only thanks to the constellation Sagittarius. Chiron was furious at her words. He said that the Hydra still has the same poisonous tongue and even threatened to cut it off. Grinning, the Hydra noticed that the centaur himself had a vile tongue. But before he was a more gentle and courteous man. Then the Hydra turned to the guy again, asking for his name. He confirmed that his name is Ha-Jun. Hydra expressed obvious interest in the guy. Ha-Jun felt awkward, but Lucio immediately began poking him in the face with her hands and asking him not to look at the Hydra. Otherwise, she might seduce him with that look. Then the Hydra interrupted their next skirmish and told Ha-Jun that he needed her saliva. The girl was holding a small test tube with liquid in her hand. She knew everything from the very beginning and understood exactly what Chiron needed. After all, her saliva was able to heal him. Ha-Jun was surprised that the Hydra knew everything from the very beginning and did not say anything to his attempts to justify himself. Hydra replied that he smelled like Chiron, and she had an excellent sense of smell. Looking at the centaur, the Hydra extended her hand to him with the soda, which contained her saliva, and quite unexpectedly invited Chiron to take it away. The centaur was shocked by this proposal and immediately thought that the Hydra was definitely up to something because she could not give him the antidote just like that. Hydra said offendedly that Chiron was wrong to mistake her for some villain. But it was not she who initially poisoned him. This was done by Hercules, a student of Chiron, which was annoying for the centaur. But what does Hydra have to do with it? What exactly is her fault? Approaching the centaur, the Hydra handed him the antidote and said that she had been waiting for him for a long time until he came for the medicine. Chiron was wary of the Hydra, but still took the antidote from her, opened the bottle, and drank its contents. Immediately his body glowed with a purple light, and severe pain pierced the centaur as the medicine spread through his veins. My leg immediately began to hurt more, but it seemed that she was about to be healed. After a couple of seconds of prolonged sighs, the centaur fell to the ground right in front of the Hydra and stopped moving. Looking at all this, Ha-Jun and Lucio were scared. The guy thought that the Hydra poisoned Chiron and thus killed him. But he didn't want to believe it. Then a cough was heard on the ground. Chiron woke up and grabbed his legs and then exclaimed in surprise that his limbs had returned to their previous state, 3,890 years. All this time, the centaur endured terrible pain in the world of constellations. But now Chiron can finally put an end to this torment. Kneeling down in front of the centaur, the Hydra put her hand on his head, saying with relief that Chiron really had to endure a lot of pain, which lasted indefinitely. But now it's over. It's time to say goodbye to the Hydra and go home. Already sitting in a room in the centaur's house, Lucio and Ha-Jun waited for Chiron to finally come out and pay for their work. Lucio, of course, was indignant at how a guy could think about money at such moments. This was disdainful even towards Chiron. And in general, if you think like that, then it was the Hydra that gave the antidote to the centaur, and not Ha-Jun. Therefore, he cannot claim payment for delivery at all. Then Chiron's voice was heard outside the door. Entering the room, he apologized that his partners had been waiting for him for a long time. Having already appeared on the threshold, Chiron looked happy. He said he was looking for something, so he stayed late. The centaur held a wooden bow in his hands. Ha Jun was about to argue that the wait was long enough, but Lucio shouted him down and kindly said that it was okay and that they had waited a little. Ha Jun realized that it was all because of the bow in the hands of the centaur. Chiron said that he wanted to give it to Hercules, but then he thought that it would be more suitable for Ha Jun and decided to give the bow to the guy. Ha Young thought to himself, upset, that it would be better if the centaur gave him money instead of this. Be that as it may, he will accept the bow with gratitude. Then the door behind them suddenly opened, and a large and impressive figure of a guy in armor appeared on the threshold. Everyone in the room turned around sharply and tried to figure out who had come to them. The male voice apologized to Chiron for appearing so suddenly. Lucio was the first to recognize the guy. Before them stood the real god of war, Ares. He said he would explain the details of his visit later. Staring at God, Ha Jung disparaged him, saying that he was just another fool from Olympus. Lucio was shocked by his words. She thought that the guy was crazy, because in front of him was the son of Zeus and Hera, Ares, that is, essentially a prince among the gods. Then the god of war saw a man with a nymph and asked if he was the same Ha Jung Li. The guy confirmed his words with a stuttering voice. Then Ares jumped up and rushed towards the guy, saying that he had finally found him. Ha Jun was already scared, but the next moment God fell to his knees in front of him and began to ask for help. The guy was surprised and did not understand what had happened, but Ares, almost tearfully and very persistently, asked Ha Jung to help him while standing on everyone's knees. The absurdity of the situation amazed the guy. He, Ha Jun Li, an ordinary person who is 27 years old, was worshipped by God. So the guy became the first among people to experience this feeling.